to have you back.
Yeah, glad to be back. Yeah.
Heck
Sorry
yeah.
about the delay.
Oh, no worries, man. No
We know
worries.
how it is.
It's a busy time, and then summer's always busy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, seems busy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we have, as you can see, we've added a little bit to your shrine.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
And then we found this loose Xena figure at this place called McKay's Bookstore in Nashville. It has like comic books, DVDs,
Yeah.
movies, music.
Awesome.
Yeah, if you ever go there, you'll spend like $1,000 probably.
Yeah.
If everything.
Yeah, it's so funny because there's this there's definitely that tendency to buy that stuff. When I was making Hercules and Xena, there was a bunch of us, include mostly the guys from K&B Effects. You know, I don't know if you know K&B Effects group that ended up doing a ton of special makeup effects for Tarantino later. You know, they started with Sam Raimi, you know, on Evil Dead, and then they moved into like Darkman and stuff like that.
yeah.
And then they ended up doing Hercules and Xena. And I just remember Howard Berger, who's the B in K&B. Anytime we had like a weekend break, we would go to like these poster stores and just spend the whole day like blowing all our per diem just buying like movie posters, you know.
Awesome.
So yeah, there's like, yeah, we're all kind of convention nerds, just want to buy stuff. I've got tons of it.
Yeah.
And then we found the one we used to have, we still have the one piece of it moving
Oh yeah.
right there, but we found yeah, there's this comic book store in Franklin, Tennessee called Starbase Comics, and they have all these vintage toys,
Everything,
like,
comic books,
everything. Like, yeah, so we found one of these that was cool. And they had
Cool.
there was much stuff we couldn't buy, you know, because you can't buy everything. There was a lot of Hercules figures from the show.
Oh yeah, a lot.
Oh yeah.
Funny how
other Xena stuff too, and like some of the other characters.
It shows how far-reaching it all really was. I know Hercules was number one show. Was the number one show in like 500 countries or something.
Like that. Yeah.
So like it's like even now, you know, you go to just any like store, comic book store, there's just gonna be content like DVDs, stuff like that. And also like that figures. It just shows how far-reaching your work and everybody who was a part of that is. Yeah. Like I said, that's our generation. So
that's super cool. I like I said, it's like I don't know whether it's a nerd thing or just a me thing, but I have like no concept of time. I guess probably because my wife and I never had children, so you don't have that like, you know, thing where you're watching this baby grow into an adult, so you have a sense of so to me it just seems like, you know, not that long ago, you know, that I did those shows. And it's interesting. I think it's cool that it's great to hear from you guys, because those, like I said last time, the shows that you watch when you're a kid that get you into it in the first place are really strong, regardless of like what the objectively what the quality of the show is. It's just that if it hits you at the right time and just like sort of like sets those things off, that's like really, you know, that's super cool and gratifying. So because there were so many shows that did that for me, to have been part of something that like did something, you know, for you guys, that's really neat. I love that, you know. That's
that Xena noise.
Oh yeah.
Right. You used to always do that. Yeah.
How funny. Well, actually, Xena, you know, it's funny because unfortunately, you know, Hercules Sorbo, you know, has become known of late of these extremely sort of right wing.
Yeah, he's making,
you know, so it's kind of like he kind of sullied that a little bit, you know, whereas. And funny enough, I think you might have heard, or maybe we even talked about it, that when that was going on, I can't remember what the specific circumstance was, that Lucy came back with a tweet or something and just like kicked his ass with it, you know, because it's good that you have the Xena toys, because I think those stay relevant.
We were at a festival with Kevin Sorbo. We didn't meet him, but like a movie he acted in was in the festival, and it was a really kind of it was one of those like really conservative minded kind of movies.
It wasn't that
well. It was about like the Pledge of Allegiance or something. And
that one. And I was thinking of the one he directed.
The one he directed was
he did one where he's like
he did one with John Ratzenberger.
He
directed.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't bad really. It was like a period piece,
like
but
too political. But he did one that was all about it was called One Nation Under God, and it was all about the pledge and trying to keep it in schools and not change it, stuff like that.
So some 10-year-old kid decides that I'm not going to stand for this, and then the movie just it's really funny.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, like, you know, it's like when your message is so didactic, it's like, like it's like it starts to get into those kind of like, like religious, mood, like these, these like Judgment Day kind of movies and stuff, where it's just like those are hard to, those are hard to watch.
Yeah.
So where do we leave off? I think left off on the Brady Bunch and Mary Kay Letourneau, but I think the next thing we can go into is Wild Things 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, our story with Wild Things 2 is that it used to come on the Stars Network all the time.
Yeah, that's when we first saw it.
And we would watch it like over and over again. And we like it.
Really?
Yeah, and we like it more than the first Wild Things.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it more. Yeah.
Yeah. It had to have been Stars because it was Sony, right?
Yeah, I think
it was Sony. Yeah.
Time, so. But yeah, that middle school, high school. So we always, like I said, we liked it more than the first one. We just felt like it gave us more as like a viewer.
They just want, they could go. They weren't boggled down by trying to like bank off of like Matt Dillon or Kevin Bacon. They could just go further with it. It wasn't, with the story.
You could go further with it. As
the filmmakers and all you guys, like you go further with the story and just the the atmosphere of it, which is really cool.
And very, I think
very atmospheric in the swamp and the this everything that.
Right.
How did you get involved with the movie Wild Things 2?
Yeah, that was like a probably one of my probably the first sort of like outside of Xena kind of like job for hire. So like that movie was like put into motion, I guess, by Sony Columbia. And at the time they were starting their sort of direct to DVD sort of divisions. Each studio had their own kind of direct to DVD. So this is 2003, 2004, right? I think around that period. Yeah. And so DVD is going strong. They realize that there's like a really lucrative market in producing franchise or creating franchises out of successful titles. So I think it was their goal. I think the studio was like, let's just make more of Wild Things and see if it'll catch. And so the script had already been written. So like I had nothing to do necessarily with the creation of the story. The script had already been developed. Okay. And then they were essentially interviewing directors. And so I was put forward by my agent manager at the time to go in and interview for the movie. And it's like anything. It's like it's like you're casting a director. So a lot of people go in, and more often than not, you don't get the job. Just like if you're auditioning as an actor. In this particular case, however it went in the room, or I think at that point La Cucaracha was the movie that they were sort of putting forward as, well, look what this guy can do. And I think a lot of it had to do with just like, how can you achieve a bigger look on a lower budget, which is what they were dealing with. Because La Cucaracha, again, was like shot in 18 days. It was like under 2 million. I think Wild Things 2 was like a $3 million movie, maybe shot in 22 days. It was like a similar sort of thing. But I guess what my management was sort of putting forward, saying, look, like, if you want the movie to look as big or bigger than the movie that the original film at like a third of the budget, then this is like one of the guys that can do that. So that was sort of the angle. Plus, I guess La Cucaracha had a certain amount of atmosphere to it, even though it was set in Mexico. It has nothing to do with like high school in the. So it was kind of like, can this person deliver a studio-looking movie on a small budget and make it look bigger than its budget? So I think all those things. Plus, I was telling my students this, like, and I was talking to you guys about this too. It's like, getting a chance to make a movie is rare. So even if it wasn't like I was like a Wild Things 1 maniac or anything, it wasn't like that was my favorite movie. I had seen the movie. But it wasn't like I was like dying to make Wild Things 2. On the other hand, I wanted to make a movie. So I went in there and pitched it like I was like the only person that I was destined to make this, erotic swamp thriller. And I was throwing every reference to every movie, and I have I'm misspent youth. So I've seen every movie ever made. So I can throw a million related movies into the pitch. And I pitched it like it was my destiny to make this, because I wanted the job, and because I respond to thrillers anyway, it wasn't like the high school thing was necessarily that interesting to me, but the world of a noir with betrayal and, like you said, the Everglades and all this stuff was fun as a filmmaker for me. So I was like, yeah, give me this, put me in. So I just got it. I was lucky I got the gig. And then I went to, and then we shot it in both LA and in Florida. Most of it was shot in LA. And then we had to get a certain number of, I think it was like a week or maybe a week and a half in South Florida because of the, the Everglades and things that we couldn't necessarily fake. But there was a lot of fun stuff there. Like, for example, going back to KNB, we were talking about special makeup effects. There's a swamp, in Wild Things 2 where a lot of the action takes place, and
a lot of alligators and stuff. I was
right, exactly. So I was going to bring that up. So like what was interesting is that we did shoot in the Everglades proper, which is like 30 minutes outside of like Fort Lauderdale, which is really like hardcore, like backwoods. I'll tell you a story about that. That was freaky because I went into into a location to shoot. There's a bit at the beginning where she's driving from the swamp and she's driving back, and there's a little kid like on a rope swing, and you kind of get these kind of like almost like shanty town encampments that are like which is real. But the main swamp area was in South Florida where there's like a crippled airboat that's like half sunk in the swamp, and that's where Isaiah Washington goes in and gets the Melaleuca tree thing. All that stuff is like, and so we needed this controllable area. If you shoot in the Everglades, there's no like electricity, there's no facilities. It's like the swamp, right? So what our location people found is like right in the middle of Fort Lauderdale, like in the city, like proper, there was this sort of, imagine sort of like a privately owned sort of what do you call it? Not even necessarily a wetlands, but it was like its own little micro Everglades on like an estate. Okay. And essentially there was like, it wasn't overgrown. What we did was imagine just like a big sort of swampy lake on this very sort of luxurious property with a lot of trees. And we just sort of realized that, wow, that's like we can like cross the street and be at like a 7-Eleven. And if we dress this with, I had my production designer, Reiko Kobayashi, who I've worked with many times, dress in all kinds of like, moss and all this stuff, that we could actually have a really controllable, production friendly location to shoot all of that. Yeah. Like primary acting, because to have actors out in the actors, it's like not like The Revenant, like we're not going to do that, it's like it has to be like humane. So we were really lucky with that. We had like because you never know, because like if you basically pointed the camera up and a little bit to the left, you'd see like skyscrapers where all that stuff takes place. So, but there was some cool stuff where, like, for example, the high school is supposed to be on the beach because there's like this, there's a volleyball, it's that volleyball sequence right at the beginning. And I wanted to show how the high school and the beach were connected. Now, there wasn't actually any high school in South Florida, like a block from the beach, but there is a high school in LA where we shot all the high school stuff. It's actually the Grease High School.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah. I thought it looked familiar. I was like, that high school looks very familiar. Wow.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, there's certain like period high schools that were like built in the 50s that are like production friendly. Like, so when you're looking for like to shoot at a school, there's like a list of, like in LA, there's like a list of ones that like where they shoot all the time. And this one was out near Venice. I don't think it was Venice High School, but it's on the way to Venice Beach. And it has that real kind of like deco sort of architecture. And it has what's interesting is it has these sort of pedestrian elevated walkways, like it's weird. It's like it has these like elevated like bridges, even though they're not going anywhere, like students can walk from like one building to another. Yeah. And when I was in Florida, I realized that there was this like a sort of quasi walkway that just led to the beach, like from a parking lot, not from any school. And so I deliberately designed these shots so that you would see like Susan Ward and her friend like walking along like, this thing in LA, and then I would turn around and like shoot the remainder of the walk, heading towards the ocean. It was like that kind of old school, like, it's like two different worlds just glued together with a cut, and all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, and I did the same thing with the volleyball. You see like a a mob of LA kids swarming over the
when
walkways. And then we went to, Fort Lauderdale like 2 weeks later, and I had a swarm of Fort Lauderdale kids coming on. So it's just cutting, on a mob to a mob, and it's the same mob. And I did that actually again in there's a scene where it's one of these like requisite, like, there are all these things in the movie that the studio wants, like get them, get the three-way, get as many like cheesecake shots of the women. So there's a shot like after they practice volleyball where Susan Ward is under like a shower head, and she looks, and then there's that cicatrice character staring at her across this walkway, and the walkway is the high school in LA where the guy is looking, and she's in Fort Lauderdale looking, because you see the ocean behind her. And what I did was it's something I stole from Jaws, really, from Spielberg, which is that I had on Susan's side, as she's looking, I had these people crossing in front of the lens, like like beach passersby. So she's looking and the ocean's behind her, and you see these people wiping through the lens. And then a month later, I turned around and shot the guy on the bridge looking, and I just had other people walking through the lens. So on the wipe, it looks like you're cutting on the wipe of the people passing, and even though it's not the same person, even in the same wardrobe, it ties those two shots together, because you perceive the same people wiping in front of the two. So it's just two different. So I love doing that kind of stuff, because it's it's just like old school, movie trickery. It's like
in America's Deadliest Home Video. That cut, and we just could not,
after the car fell.
We thought it was all one shot.
Like, how did they make this look like one take?
And then you're a master at
editing.
Well, it's just it's basically the age you grow up in. Like there are people like yourselves, like you guys are born into a world of computers and digital editing and all color and all kinds of things that are things that by the time I was your age had no it was just brand new to me. Like, so it's and so like when anything that's like, so if you're born into like, well, this is the only way to do it, you have to do it with a dummy, or you have to do it with a matte painting, or you have to do it with like, those are the things that you're trained in. So that just becomes like second nature. Like, well, that's how we should do it. But I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know if we didn't talk about Mega Shark yet, but I think that there are some tricks in there that are like some old school in-camera tricks that are that young people, when I was making the movie, would be like, oh my God, I never even thought you could do it that way, because it's not something that you were trained in. It was like, well, why do it like that if you can do it in the computer? Like why bother? So but I don't know, I think it's just, I'm one of those old practical effects guys that just gets excited by the trickery of it, and the fact that it's happening, that you're doing it actually as you're shooting it. I think, to me, there's something about that I think it goes back to the essence of filmmaking itself, because everything about filmmaking is a trick, really. I mean, the perpetual motion is a trick. The very technology of one frame after another is a trick. The idea of cutting shots together to create the illusion of continuous motion is a trick. All the things in movie making that we kind of take for granted, the whole thing is a trick. So even if it's used to create deep art, the medium itself is about like fooling you into believing that this is real, right? So given that sort of basis of it, I feel like in-camera trickery, and faking, cutting two different worlds together and making it appear as one, that just is part of the natural process of making movies. It's just baked in a certain way.
And we see that approach a lot in your movies. And
and in Wild Things too, it was just full of tricks and twists. Like, we were talking about earlier, how it's like, you think it's it's like a twist within a twist within a twist. You think it's just her doing the the scam, then it's her and her friend, but no, spoiler, her stepdad's still alive and she's been working with him, but then no, using him too.
And then in the credits you find out
so it was her and her mom.
Right.
And there's that stinger in the credits where it looks like it's been her all along, and she's tricking.
And then she's
and then she's
poisoning
gonna
her mom.
poison her mom, and she's gonna get all the money now. It's like a twist within a twist within a twist.
And,
it was great.
Yeah.
Well, all that credit really goes to the writers. You know, like to me, like actually being able to like that's like for example, that's like a talent like I don't have. Like I can interpret that as a director, but like coming up with like all these like double and triple and quadruple crosses and keeping that straight when I write. Like if you look at any things that I write are fairly like linear, like this happens and this happens and this happens. It's all very logical because I can't think of like these like, you know, these Rube Goldberg sort of complicated plot lines because it's just, you know, it drives me crazy. But it's fun to do. It's totally fun to do. You know.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think that like credit sequence where or that post credit sequence or end credit sequence where you start to get these glimpses of, oh, this is how it was done and this is what's really going on, I think was actually another studio like do that because that's what they did. I think they did that in the first one too. So I mean everything about like that sequel was like, how can we do this, how can we it's like any studio thinking, like how can we replicate the success of the first one, do give them the same thing but maybe more, you know, or a little bit, or maybe a little bit different, but essentially it's the same hamburger. And I found that in that circumstance, I'm trying to remember, nobody really messed with me and what I was doing. It was like as long as those ingredients are on the hamburger, then you're kind of like, in that case I was left alone. Like nobody was like saying don't, I mean, because that's when it's fun, you know, like with the Brady Bunch. Like, if I don't think Fox gave a shit that it was like a film noir version of the Brady Bunch. They just wanted it to have these things in it, you know.
Yeah.
And as long as those things are in it, they're like, okay, good, that's in it, so good. And they're not really looking at it from like a design perspective or whatever. Oh, but going back to the that lake or that sort of controllable environment in Fort Lauderdale that stood in for the swamp. So alligators are a part of that movie, right? And so there was one place in the actual Everglades where there was an alligator sanctuary where there were real, like hundreds of real alligators, and we went there to shoot basically close-ups of the alligators going, you know, like basically we went to this place to shoot all these close-ups, but we didn't really shoot anything but the inserts of the gators. That's what we needed. And a lot of that was just like, you know, at feeding time, throwing like raw chicken so that they would do.
They look vicious.
But, right. So there are all these moments where, you know, like at the beginning where she's looking and they're, you know, the alligators are eating the flowers. So there were specific things that we had to shoot as inserts at the gator farm. It was like a laundry list of like, we need 12 or 14 gator inserts, right? But then, you know, again, the issue is how do you tie that to a location where there are no alligators, right? You know, like how do you make it appear that those gators? I mean, yes, if you have somebody on a swamp in Fort Lauderdale going gator, and you cut to a gator, yeah, your mind's going to go. But I wanted a little bit more, and I don't know how evident it is, but I talked to KNB Effects again and said, do you guys have any alligator like prop alligator stuff? And they said, yeah, we've got this. I think they actually had an animatronic, which was too expensive and too big a deal. But what they did have were these, basically the tops of alligators that appear when they're out of the water. So it's basically like the hump of the back and like a piece of the head, you know, and maybe a piece of the tail. It's just the surface part of the alligator. And it was basically like a sailboat that you basically stuck on top of the water. And we got two of those, and we basically had fishing line on either side of the banks. And so when she's like, there's scenes where she's like standing on the pier talking to like Isaiah Washington saying blah, blah, blah. And if you look closely in the background, you see these like alligators like crossing behind her. And anytime we had any kind of like, later there's a scene where they're like, they're searching the swamp with like police boats and stuff. I had again those basically plastic alligator, you know, of models cruising, you know, the water, just so that you would sort of, oh yeah, so this is full of alligators and it's not just inserts. So if you, as many times as you've seen it, if you want to if you want to look at any of those swamp scenes, and I think in particular, it's the bit where she's standing there alone and Isaiah Washington comes up behind her and says, starts to question her. If you look at her shots, it's like a wide shot and then a tighter shot of her, you'll see the plastic alligator sort of cruising.
Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, but that's just like, whether anybody sees it or not, those are the kind of things like, all right, cool. Like that's what I can do. I can't put real alligators in there, but
what makes it better. Yeah.
Yeah. We wondered, we're like, man, they're in such close proximity. Some of those shots, we were like, were they really like near that close to an alligator?
And then Isaiah Washington gets in the water at one point to grab the plant, and I'm like, man, I'm worried like a real gator is just gonna.
Yeah, no, that's like so you're trying to avoid, when you can.
Yeah. Do you like have a hand in the casting of the movie?
Only Isaiah. They had already cast Susan Ward, and I think we were casting for the Lila Archieri, who ended up playing the other part. I remember having a hand in that, but they hadn't cast the insurance investigator, and that was the one like fun thing for me because they almost didn't care who that was, and I was like a big fan of his from a Spike Lee film that I'd seen called Clockers. Oh, okay. And I just always thought he got into a lot of like scandalous like shit later, but at the time I just thought he was a terrific actor that was underused. And I always like to try to get, if I can, actors that I either want to work with or have already worked with that I enjoy directing, because that just makes it more fun for me. Yeah. So I really pitched the studio on him, and they accepted that. And so that was great because he really did, add a certain quality that would not have been there if it was just like regular.
You were like, I guess the whole like love him or hate him thing. Isaiah Washington's a very talented actor.
He did a good job.
He did a very good job in the movie. I think he understood the assignment in that he like realized he could go really far with this. It wasn't
just a stuffed shirt. He was actually like in character. He was really trying. He was in character. Yeah, really took it seriously. Yeah.
And he was, no, most definitely. It's like so interesting because I've never seen this before. I at one point he was in the first week or something we were shooting. He went. Stepped off to go to the bathroom or something, and I looked over at his script, which had been open like on his chair there, and I just saw I'd never seen this with an actor. It was just like covered, like just completely like wallpapered with extremely detailed notes, motivational notes, what the character's thinking, feeling at every single. Like the guy really, like the guy took his work seriously, which not all actors do. Like actors like, I'll remember my lines and he was really, and what's really funny is that when we first had our first meeting, I said, have a look at Humphrey Bogart in The Big Sleep, because there's something about Bogart's demeanor in general, and particularly as Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep, the Howard Hawks film from 1945. There was something about that I just thought would be an interesting, like something as a basis for this character. And what's so interesting is that he took, I don't know how much of it he took, but he took one specific thing. If you've seen The Big Sleep, there's a scene at the beginning of that movie where Bogart goes in to meet with the old gentleman that's hiring him for the job, and it's in a greenhouse. And it's the whole joke of that scene is that it's like 1,000 degrees in there. So Bogart is constantly like dabbing himself with like a handkerchief, and he's sweating because of this situation that he's in, this interview in this greenhouse. And I started to notice that because Isaiah adopted this thing, so he started carrying around this handkerchief, and you'll see him in different scenes, sort of like wiping the perspiration. So it's always interesting to see what an actor like grabs onto, like, oh wow, this prop thing about like, I'm sweating because it's in Florida and I'll use this thing as a thing. And I thought that was interesting, that he sort of like took that, little detail and made it into something.
I think it's fun, as directors ourselves and screenwriters and things like that. We like it when we're doing a movie and we want the actors to kind of emulate someone. So we like give them like 3 movies to watch. like kind of like what you did with the Humphrey Bogart thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
Right.
that's fun, you
Helps
know.
them create quirks to the character.
Yeah,
Some
that's got to be a fun,
mannerisms, stuff like
fun
that,
thing to
or
do.
just the energy you're going for
Yeah,
the
yeah.
performance,
And then
all that,
especially
yeah,
like
yeah.
you grow up being a fan of those movies, and then you're
Mhm.
kind of like putting a little bit of that magic into your own because
That's a really good point. I think that's probably the selfish thing. I think that there's always, and it depends on the movie that you're making. Sometimes you can't get as much of it as you want, but I think the thing that makes us want to make movies, where we love the movies that made us want to make movies so much that it's almost like there you can't help yourself. You're trying to like sort of not give back, but somehow like take that thing and put it into your own work, whether it's themes or shots or storylines or characters or whatever it is. You're trying to like take the thing that is like in you that made you who you are and kind of put it in, and you start to see that. What's interesting is that when somebody has the power to do it like literally, like I've only seen it twice. I saw it with Peter Jackson with King Kong, because obviously like King Kong is a huge movie for a lot of people our age, the original King Kong.
Yes.
And so with the power of Lord of the Rings and all that, jillions of dollars, he gets to make, like, it's not just about like injecting like homages. It's like you get to I'll make the thing that I love the most. And I think what's so interesting, at least for me, is that nobody is a bigger fan than Peter Jackson of King Kong, and yet it's not like I'm not crazy about that movie, and it doesn't really make much sense. You would think that, oh, it would have to be the greatest King Kong movie ever made because it's Peter Jackson and it's this favorite movie, and yet it's almost like it's like uncanny valley. It's like you're not supposed to make exactly the thing that you love. It's better to just kind of pepper it in, rather than make the whole thing, because like almost like what's the point of that? Like it's like why are you making something that you love so much? Just doesn't need to be remade. I don't know, something about that. It's just kind of weird.
Yeah.
You don't want to do like just a beat for beat, shot for shot remake, because you got to do your own spin on it. Or it'll be like the Gus Van Sant Psycho that everybody just shat on because it was just like
shot for shot remake in color. Right. Yeah.
And like what Christopher Nolan said a few years ago, because now I can see that remakes are waning a little bit. You're kind of seeing more like TV show remakes of movies and things, like with the new attraction. But Chris Nolan said, I'm sure you remember, he said they need to just stop worrying so much about reboots and remakes and start re-releasing films in theaters, which you do see a lot more now.
Yeah.
I've always said that. Yeah, no, I mean, because it's like, if the thing is already great and the print is, in the library, save yourself the trouble and just release them. Like, how many Spider-Man movies do you really need to
exactly.
reboot? So they just re-release the Raimi one, Tobey Maguire. It's it's like, why show it, but I think that's true.
So isn't there like a Wild Things like 3 and 4?
Oh yeah,
there was. They actually asked me. It was funny. They asked me to do, because then what happened is that I guess Wild Things 2 rented well, right?
Oh, yeah.
So then they were like, okay, let's do what we want to do. Let's make this let's make as many Wild Things as we possibly can make. And they asked me if I would do Wild Things 3, and at the time I kind of felt like I was a little scared that it would just be, I don't know. I was kind of self-conscious of like, oh, I'm going to put my name on Wild Things 3 now. Am I going to be the Wild Things guy? So I asked them if I could use a pseudonym. I would do it, but I would want to take a pseudonym. And then I think the studio got offended. Like, how dare he? What do you mean he doesn't want to put his name on Wild Things 3? And I kind of had a joke. It was like, the joke was Wild Things 2, shame on you. Wild Things 3, shame on me. But the funny thing is that the business is such a parabola, in the sense that, like, I was suddenly in a position, because 2004 was a rare year for me. I made 2 feature films in 1 year, which has never happened. So not only was it like starting to feel like, oh, maybe this is going to be my life, which it's not. But also, for like the first time in like whatever it was, like 13 years or 14 years, I didn't have to worry about like paying the rent at that moment. So I was suddenly in a position to be like a slightly pickier. And so I didn't say, yes, I'll do it. Absolutely. I was kind of like, yeah, I'll do it, but and I didn't get it. And then of course, all of a sudden, Murphy's Law, it was like a dry spell after that. It was like there was no work. And so like I was like killing. I was like, oh shit, I should have taken Wild Things 3 because now I'm like struggling again. So looking back on it, if I had made Wild Things 3, it really wouldn't have made any difference one way or the other. But I do think it's like there's a reason why I didn't really stay in television either, and that has to do with just being bored with doing exactly the same thing over and over again. And that's really what it would have been. I mean, Wild Things 3, I read the script, it was basically Wild Things 2 one more time, you know what I mean? And I had already sort of done what I could do with it. So it's kind of like when you're making something, if it's the same exact thing, which it was, then it was just like I felt like, well, it can only be worse. Like I don't know what else I can do with this budget to make it more interesting. So that's probably another reason, which is just like I was probably just gonna not make a very good movie. But then again, it's like when you get into a situation where you're desperate, which often happens, where you're like, I need to make a movie, then it really doesn't matter. Then you're like, I'll do it. Because I've been in the situations where I've made a couple things where it was just like that was what was in front of me at the time, and that was the only choice. And so yeah, but they did make, I think they made a 4 too. They made a Wild Things 4. Didn't see either of those, but
well, I mean, what about Susan Ward? We're big fans of hers because like the
In Crowd she was in,
and she was the star of that, and she did a lot of similar things. She had a TV show for years. How was she working with?
She was cool. She was super professional and really nice, and really super pleasant, almost to a fault, like very much like, she would call me sir, sir, can we, like that kind of thing, like super like Southern sort of.
She's
it just like super duper like polite and everything. I knew what was interesting was that she was also really nervous about like in the first day of shooting, and I think it was just because I don't really know. I think she was just, everybody gets nervous. And I remember she had like really like, like feeling nervous and sick to her stomach, almost to the point of not being able to perform on day one. But to her credit, like did that old showbiz thing, like just pulled it together. Like the first thing we shot were like that scene in the library where, she goes in and she sees the librarian and she has a thing with Lila and they kiss and all that was happening like in the first couple of shots. And I think she was like starting to, just get freaked by the whole thing. But she pulled it together. I mean, she was, she did a good job.
Yeah. And Lila was cast like what, like they said like in the making of it said like 2 days before filming.
Yeah. Like total last minute stuff. And there's a whole other, so that was that too. Yeah. She was like a very last minute, like finally found somebody.
Terrific casting and terrific movie. We love it. Like I said, I mean,
that's cool. That's cool that you've seen it. Yeah, I didn't even know it was on Stars. So that's fun that you. I've had that experience as a kid too, like in the early, because like the early movie channel HBO was like brand new, when I was, and there are certain movies you just watch on a loop because they're just on all the time,
Well, heck, that was definitely one of ours. Well, here we go. Monster Island, freaking original MTV
made for new MTV, the big
MTV movie. I mean, those were a big thing.
Something we all grew up on.
I mean, they did that every now and
again. MTV does original movies anymore, but for a while there, they were doing that a lot.
And
this was just such an original, like off the wall, like throwback thing. It was just all over the place. I love it. Yeah.
So how did that come about?
How did you get involved with Monster Island?
Well, that was different from Wild Things in that was something that I actually pitched to the to MTV as an idea, and then took it through like all the stages of production. And in the sense that I pitched it, they liked the pitch, then they decided to hire me to write the script, and I went through all the various drafts with notes from them and all that stuff. And then finally, once they were happy with that, then they greenlit that for production. And there was, we can talk about it in a bit, but even when we got to production and I was in Vancouver and we were making it, there was a hiccup where it almost didn't happen. It almost all fell apart, which happens a lot with a lot of movies for different reasons. But No, this was an idea, again, going back to what we were talking about before, about taking something that you love and trying to sort of reconstitute it or put it into your own work. I grew up, you know, with a intense love of stop motion animation, specifically, you know, the 33 King Kong, but all of Ray Harryhausen's.
Harryhausen, yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, so all of those movies were like movies that as a kid, you know, on weekends, you know, this is even before cable, when like local broadcast television would just run like monster movies on the weekend. So I grew up watching on Saturdays and Sundays, you know, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and, 20 Million Miles to Earth and It Came from Beneath the Sea and Jason the Argonauts. All those movies were, just like for a lot of people, you know, were enormously formative. You know, they just like, I got super duper excited. And I read all the books on, I still have them on my shelf. You know, I still have the key books on the making. There's a book called From the Land Beyond Beyond, which is a quote from the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad that the genie says. And it's a kind of a comprehensive examination of all of Ray Harryhausen's films and all of the challenges in making them special effects wise and animation wise. So I always, you know, dreamed of finding a way to do that somehow. By the time I made Monster Island, stop motion animation mixing with live action in that way was pretty much dead. You know, there was no movies that were blending stop motion and live action the way they had been done. And so I had actually had an idea for a series where every week this sort of group of kids in this small sort of town would be besieged by a different sort of monster taken from like 1950s cinema. And the concept was that it was going to be done in the same special effects manner as those films. So it would be done not just with stop motion, but with full size sort of giant props and puppets and all the things, all the techniques that I grew up watching. And so I basically, when I heard from my manager that MTV was looking for like ideas, I said, well, what if I take this series idea and just sort of like turn it into a single movie concept? And that's what I pitched. And I pitched specifically that we would be using this anachronistic special effects technique that would be so old it would be new again, or it would be so old that it was hip. It was like how I pitched it them, when really it was just selfishly me wanting to make a stop motion animated monster movie. And the only way I got around it was that I basically made it like a monster comedy, so that anybody who was like, you know, going, hey, these effects are cheesy, would like understand, hopefully, that was all part of the comedy.
Yeah.
You know, that was the idea. That's what I pitched, and that's what they bought. I don't think they fully understood what that meant, but they sounded good to them. And again, it was still living in that weird sort of $3 to $5 million, like it wasn't a huge amount of money. So if we could make it work for that, then that was okay with them. But it was like it was one of the only times in my life where I've gone through the whole sort of mill of draft and notes, and you still don't know if you're going to make it. And it was just kind of a long process of finally getting it green lit and made. The funny thing, like I was saying, was that one of the ways that they were able to save money is by shooting in Canada, which at the time was like there was a lot of production going to Canada because it was cheaper to shoot there. The problem was the script was written as a jungle Bermuda Triangle world, and I ended up shooting in like Canada in the woods in the middle of winter, in like the coldest, wettest winter that I ever experienced. Which was not my plan. My plan was like, because if you look at old 1950s sort of jungle set movies, including going back earlier to King Kong, like those are not exterior practical jungles. These are like basically jungles that are built on a soundstage, and that has a certain artificial quality that is good, I think. You know, like it looks like a jungle set, right? And so that was my idea. It was like, well, let's just make it all of one thing. It's like stop motion, but it's also like, you know, quasi-artificial jungle. It'll all sort of blend together. But they were like, no, we got to go to Canada, and we don't have the budget to build your jungle set. We have the budget to do the stop motion. So you're going to have to shoot outside in the woods
Oh wow.
which is not jungle. You know, it's like the woods of Vancouver are like oak trees and pine trees.
Yeah.
So besides the weather, that presented a real problem because for me it was like, well, not that I'm like this has to be like authentically the South Pacific, but there's this the woods don't look like a jungle. And one of the things we again going back to old movie tricks, what we started to think about was how can we trick the eye into thinking that like oak trees and pine trees are really like tropical? Like how do you do that? Like how can you do that? And cheaply. And so again, I was working with my production designer, the same woman that I worked with on Wild Things, Reiko Kobayashi, who also did, like I was talking about, La Cucaracha. She was the one that built the canteen in the porn set. So I was talking to her and I was like, what can we do? And we stumbled upon this idea that, again, like when you're looking at anything, if you're looking at me, your target is here, right? You are taking in the world, but you're not necessarily paying deep attention to what's way back there. You're looking here, right? So what if we put things in the foreground that were tropical? Would that somehow would your mind go? So what we ended up doing is we went to the nurseries in Vancouver. And we bought all the palm fronds and banana plants and anything that was like tropical, and we would stick them in front of the lens. And particularly when people were, there's a lot of walking and talking. So if they're like walking and talking and you see these like things going by in the foreground, these are just basically potted plants that have palm fronds and banana leaves that are going by in the hopes that if you see this, your brain goes, okay, that's a palm frond probably, and so is all those oak trees back there too. Was sort of the concept. Whether it works or not, I think there are scenes where it's like painfully obvious you're in the woods, but it's there were certain things that we did that were an attempt to keep it jungly.
I didn't question. I mean, I knew it was obviously filmed in Vancouver because it had
the actors.
I knew Mary Louise Winstead. I knew Ernst is from there, and like some of the other. So yeah, but I didn't even. But I wasn't like thinking like this doesn't look like a tropical island. I was convinced. So you guys did it.
There were a couple of like if you look at the beginning, like when they come into when they first land on the island and they come into like the dance area or the stage area, there are a couple of like painfully like proppy plastic, like palm tree. They were like, I think we had 2 like 12-foot plastic palms or something that we stuck, in different places. But, I mean, for me, again, it was just like the ability to somehow like with a certain degree of scale, do all of these monster effects.
Yeah.
Except for like some of the full-size ant stuff, which again is stuff that I liked because in addition to the Ray Harryhausen influences, like there's a movie called Them from 1954, which is like the first sort of atomic mutation movie. It was actually a really, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's like it's giant ants basically attacking Los Angeles. And it was all done with full-size sort of animatronic ants. There was no miniatures. It was just giant ants they built, which is, and I thought, well, that would be cool too, because, whether it's and even in a Ray Harryhausen movie, you'll see like a Mysterious Island, you'll see like the animated giant crab, and then it'll cut in and you'll get like a big giant crab pincer interacting with an actor. So like there's a bit with Ernst, when he's in the cab of the bulldozer and he's like, get off of it. And we have this giant, like 12-foot praying mantis, prop on a stick that's just coming in and like, so that was all of one sort of thing. But we did have like a whole like army of stop motion animators and also model builders, like building all of those sets, building all of those jungle sets and caverns and mountains and sculpting the models. And it was like a really cool, that was like one of the funnest things, is there was like a whole soundstage that was dedicated to just the miniatures and animation. And so all of these worlds were, I'll send you some photos because they're really cool.
Everybody was kind of transfixed by when you watch the movie, because you're like, wow, this is like what it used to be like, and you're loving that.
I know,
and like it's like I said, it's like
and that's not an easy sell for MTV in 2004
and
to
you
make something like that. So it's great that they did that.
You filmed it and shot it like it would have been back then. I'm sure there was like some digital touch-ups and things like that. But
when we saw
actually there wasn't. I mean, the only digital, the thing is the only digital stuff we did at all was certain compositing that would have otherwise been done in an optical printer. So instead of like, like there were certain like by and large, no, I think entirely every single monster effect was done on a actual, as it would have been done on actually a miniature set. So
Yes.
like the monster, if the monster's running through the jungle, it's not like we animated like they do today. It's not like he's animated against green screen. He's animated on an actual jungle set with miniature trees and miniature bulldozer and the whole thing. But if I wanted to insert the actors into that world, then what we would do is I would shoot those components. I would shoot the actors against a green screen and put in basically. So digitally, the digital work on that was strictly just compositing
Really controlled
the actors into the, because what I wanted was I exactly what you said. I wanted it to have the feel of those old films, and even to a certain extent, I guess the closest comparison is the original Land of the Lost television show, which was the same thing. And you can see the green screen in those days, or chroma key, was not very strong, but you can see when they're compositing, it's clear that the world is a miniature set, and they just sort of like pasted, superimposed the actors off a green screen or blue screen into that world. But yeah, no, even the backgrounds, the painted backgrounds, there weren't any digital environments at all. It was strictly
miniature. Were there matte paintings? Was that what that was? A lot of that?
Yeah, or they were just matte paintings in the or basically scenic backdrops. So like instead of just like building a jungle set and then dropping a green screen and then putting in whatever you want, they would actually paint clouds, on a piece of canvas or wood that would be draped behind the animation stand. So it was actually what they did in, funny enough, they did that in Empire Strikes Back. Like all the Walker stuff, the backgrounds are painted, they're painted skies. And that's just one less sort of effect step. Again, talk about in camera. It's like, well, if the sky's back there, then we don't have to make another composite. It's already in there. So that's one less step that you have to do. But I remember there was a moment where the first animation, because we were shooting, the animators were animating while we were shooting the live action part. So I was able to kind of bounce between the animators and see what was going on. And I remember the first shots came back, and with this, I had storyboarded all the, specifically like to the frame what I needed the action to be, because you don't want anybody animating. It takes so long. You don't want them to animate anything else that's not going to be in the movie. So I really spent a lot of time directing those animators, but still you're not there, positioning the camera. You're hoping that and what I noticed was the first time they did it, because these animators had strictly been working, like some of them had worked on Nightmare Before Christmas and other like full-blown animated, but they hadn't worked on anything that integrated with live action, because again, that really wasn't being done. So the first shot was a praying mantis coming down a road chasing them or something. And I remember looking at it and going, it's not right, because what had happened is they shot it from an eye level perspective on the model. So it was almost like, again, this is supposed to be like a 50-foot tall praying mantis charging. And they shot it just from it's almost like if you set something up on a table and you just set it at a nice, even perspective. But the problem is that if that was a standalone episode of whatever, David and Goliath or something, where it's just all animation, you wouldn't think twice about it. But in terms of perspective, all the shots of the live action are everybody looking up at these giant creatures. So that means that when you cut to the animation shot, it has to be from the same perspective, meaning like a really low angle. So I had to really get them to understand that, like, when these shots were meant to be points of view of things, that they had to be as if the camera had to be basically to scale, so it had to be like way down, looking up, because that's the only thing that would make sense. You can't, if you're looking, it can't be like, it's got to be like the thing is looming over you. It can't just be, that it's right here. So those were things where it was kind of like the first, like, oh fuck, they just spent like, 2 days animating this shot, and it's like, it's not right. It has to be, low. So that was an interesting sort of educational process. But It was challenging because it was cold. I mean, it was fucking like freezing, and those poor extras, they're all in like shorts and bikinis.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like spring break. Yeah,
and it is like, it's like 20 degrees or something, and it's like it was so cold, and you can see their breath. Like you see breath in certain shots because it's like cold. I ended up getting walking pneumonia of all things. It never happened before on a show. Because I was in Vancouver for a long time, and I wasn't really taking care of myself, and I wasn't suited up for winter, shooting. So my feet were always wet, and I didn't have the right coat, and I was like smoking. And by the time we wrapped, I wasn't feeling good. And I was living in there's one hotel in Vancouver called the Sutton Place, which is really, you guys would love it because it's like everybody making a movie in Vancouver stays at the Sutton Place. So it was like more congested than any place in Hollywood. You get on the elevator and like Chris Christopherson would be in there because he's with his dog because he's making Blade, and then somebody else, everybody. It was like a world of actors and stuff. And there was like a hotel doctor, and I called him up and said, "Can you check me out?" And he said, "You're going to the hospital. Like your lung isn't inflating. You've got like walking pneumonia. Go to we're going to the hospital." So it was a pretty for a silly movie. It was actually like one of the most challenging physically because it was just difficult to.
Yeah, I think
a
lot of viewers underestimate like that sort of thing.
You watch that and we're like, man, look at all the work that went into this. Like,
you're kind of thrown into the gauntlet as a director. You're out there, exteriors.
Honestly,
actual locations outside,
and that just makes everything more, making it all practical in today's day and age. It just makes it more difficult, and more work you have to do, and just so we can definitely understand that.
And I just like how you got like everybody involved, like it would have been filmed all those years ago. I keep thinking about that because you got all these animators in there, and they, a lot of them probably haven't gotten to do a lot of stop motion things. And
and
then they're like, this is probably so excited to work on it. And
I don't think they were really, I mean, again, like talk about like being influenced, it's like, like a lot of these animators got into it because of Ray Harryhausen, and suddenly you get to kind of do a quasi, a movie that's sort of in the same vein. I think they were super duper enthusiastic, and it was great because you got to, it was all the thing that you kind of learned about in books and some behind the scenes things. The animators would be like, like miming, the movements of what a praying mantis, you could see them like trying to get into it so they could, properly animate. It was like all that stuff. It was super cool.
One of the last movies of its kind. I mean, I haven't seen a movie that does that stuff like they did back in the 50s and 60s.
Wes Anderson dipped into it a little bit, but I think like I mean,
but like just full scale, like the way you were doing it,
as far as
it's like one of the last of its kind. It's really cool,
and having live action actors mixed in with it. I think you do not see that. So that's what we always loved about the movie. I remember when it premiered on MTV, it was this big thing because Carmen Electra was in it.
Oh yeah,
at the height of her fame.
And Nick Carter had like that cameo.
And
that's right.
Carmen Electra was that in the.
Well, I had actually written it. I can't remember. I think I wrote it originally. Well, that was one of the things. Is like I think when I pitched it, when I modified this series idea to pitch to MTV, I sort of anticipated that it would be like that they would want like some sort of musical component, some MTV component. So I actually like wrote in this whole idea of the contest, that Josh's sister enters him in an MTV like your whole high school class goes to wins a trip. It was like, because in those days, in the early days, that's what MTV was running. It was like, have John Cougar Mellencamp play your summer barbecue, like that kind of thing.
We could also some guys high school, I remember once.
Totally. So I kind of just took that and said, okay, well, what if that's because I just needed to get on the island, and there wasn't any other way to do it. So I was like, okay, so they win a trip to the Bermuda Triangle. And then I think it was, what's her name? Christina Aguilera. I think I actually wrote, because I think she was like the most popular at the time of then that sort of high schooly kind of pop thing. And I needed the Fay Ray, I needed the monster to take that star away. So that was the whole objective, to retrieve her. So I think in the end, Christina Aguilera was unrealistic or not available or something. So Carmen, I guess, had a relationship with MTV, and I don't know what else she was doing with them. So it's always that way. It's like the studio goes, yeah, but we know we're friendly with this person. And I'm like, all right, like it almost didn't matter, because all it needed to be was a performer that gets abducted. And there were a couple of scenes where, you know, a performer would have been, you know, or an actual actor would have been, you know, like more preferable. But in this case, it was like, it was okay. And moreover, I just wanted her to be in the Raquel Welch, you know, prehistoric, you know, bikini. You know, that was another sort of nod to Ray Harryhausen, that she winds up in this sort of cave woman outfit, you know. But no, she was totally cool. She was totally professional. You know, they had worked out a whole routine, you know, like the song had to be written for the movie. And the dance number had to be created and all that stuff. So that was interesting to work with like a choreographer and weigh in on, you know, that whole performance thing. But honestly, I was just completely, I mean, for me, it was like, it was difficult because again, it was a short schedule. So when you're shooting on a even a $3 million movie, generally you're shooting anywhere between like 8, 9 pages of script a day. And it's never just like in a movie like this, it's never just people sitting around having coffee. And none of these scenes are easy to stage. And I was talking about this the other day. I just remember I had to shoot the scene where the ant attacks the concert, and there's a big moment where it's funny because for years when they released it on video, it was like a pan and scan cropped version. You don't see some, but now I think even on YouTube there are a couple of like widescreen versions of it. But there's a shot where the full-size mechanical ant, you know, which was basically like half an ant on a big wheelbarrow kind of thing. Guys were like running with it and operating the pincers. And we had set up this whole thing where it's plowing through this crowd where we had like, you know, several hundred extras. And we had certain stunt people that were basically prepared to jump onto trampolines at a particular point. So you'll see that the ant is going through, and in the background, you start to see people like flying through the air as if they're being like tossed by the ant. But in reality, they're just running along with the ant and then jumping on a trampoline so they can get some air and doing like flips. And so there's this whole big sort of like tracking concert. And I was dying to do this shot because it's just why you make, you know, a movie like this. I just want to do this big crazy with a giant ant and stunts and all that stuff, people flying through the air. But I had to shoot like 8 other pages of stuff on that day. And it was just like, I kept looking over at all of this like hardware and extras and the ant and all these stunt people, and I couldn't shoot it because I had to shoot all this other stuff. And I kept saying, my God, imagine if I'd had like all this time that I'm shooting these other dialogue scenes, which are important. But like it's like when you shoot a big stunt scene, it's usually like you get a day at least, you know, you get like a dedicated chunk of time. And then for me, anytime I did any of these scenes, it was always just like, well, you've got like a couple hours, you better get it, you know. So it was like super, like, as always, like moving really fast and just trying to get the moments as best as I could. But it was a blast. I mean, the biggest joy really besides the animation was Adam West.
Yes, we were just about to ask about
yeah.
Because
I mean, Carmen Electra, you know, was the hottest of the hot at the time, but then you're bringing in like
she's the big hook, like, oh, Carmen Electra, but then you got to
have you got to have somebody to sell the movie.
Yeah, and then I'm sure
West,
I'm sure you grew up watching Adam West.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. That was the that's why it was significant, because Adam West was, you know, my Batman as a kid, you know, like, you know, growing up in the, you know, being born in the middle 60s and growing up in the 70s and watching Batman on TV. That way he was my Batman. And so it was one of the only instances actually when I wrote this character of Dr. Harryhausen, you know, like obviously
subtle, right?
Right, you know, that I was thinking of him. I was just like, and I had wanted to work with him in there was a time when I was first starting out where I almost got to work with him. I did a show called The Greatest Shows You Never Saw, which is a sort of for CBS, which was a sort of clip show of all the pilots, unsold television pilots that ever. I don't know if you ever saw that. You guys, I'll have to find out.
I saw something like that. It was on this channel. It might have been a repeat on some channel called Trio.
Yes, that was it. So I directed that. One of the first things I did, and we needed a host for that. And it was like obvious Adam West should be the host because he was actually in a one of the unsold pilots, and called Look Well, where he played an actor who was thought he was an actual detective. And he just would have been the perfect, like attitude wise, he would have been the perfect host. And of course, the network was like, no, you can't have him. We're going to have you use Faith Ford from Murphy Brown so that we can cross promote. And Faith Ford had like no wit or appreciation of the attitude of what we were doing. So of course she's all wrong. But and of course ended up hosting. But anyway, I wanted Adam, and it was just again one of those one in a lifetime circumstances where the person I wanted said yes.
Yeah,
And that was huge. Yeah. That was a huge thing. And he was cool. I mean, the thing is that he was exactly, I've said this, he was exactly what you wanted him to be. He was like the coolest. He was the coolest guy. The friendliest, the coolest, just, and talk about like a professional. I mean, this is a guy who, he's been around, he's an older guy, and here he is in like this, even the interior sets, like where we built his laboratory, was like fucking freezing in there. And it was like, I remember there was like an inch of water, like almost like ice water that had like saturate coming through a leak, and the floor was cold. And he's standing in water, freezing water, and it's 30 degrees in there, and he's just like busting it out, and he was, funny enough, he came into my trailer on the first day, and he knocked on the door. It was one of those great moments because I wasn't expecting it. Like, he knocked on the door. I opened the door. I mean, this is one of the few circumstances where I had a trailer, so that was like a big deal anyway. But I opened the door, and it's like Adam West. He's like, JP, are you JP? At first he's calling me JP, like it's like some old, like, JP, I love the script, JP. And I said, yeah, great. Adam, this is like a huge, honor for me. And he's like, who wrote the script, JP? I said, well, actually, I wrote it. You wrote it? Oh, come here. Like he's like, and then he says something. He goes, I'll tell you one thing though, JP. One thing that was a big help in the Batcave. And I said, what? And he said, teleprompter. I said, teleprompter. He goes, yeah, teleprompter. Think about that, JP. See if you can work that out. And I'm like, and then he left, and I was like, teleprompter. And it became clear that he was worried about the amount of dialogue that he had to remember. And as far as I could remember, I don't believe there were teleprompters ever in the Batcave. And we didn't have the money for teleprompters anyway. They weren't easy to do as they are today. So when it came time for his big sort of speech, where he first meets the kids and gives them a tour of the laboratory, I actually did the Marlon Brando thing. I was prepared, and I had like TAs with like big giant poster boards with like all his dialogue to be ready to like give him his lines. And as it turns out, again, the first take, he just rattled off like 4 pages of dialogue in one take. Didn't need the cards, didn't need anything. So he was just like totally, on his game. And again, like the sweetest guy. That's the sweetest.
That had to be. I just would have been imagining him in his Batman cowl the whole time, and I can imagine you being such a fanboy like us, like writing the script and thinking, "Wow, wouldn't that be something if I got Adam West in here?" And that manifesting itself had to have been like a big moment in your life because
huge. It was huge, and it was funny. There were these moments where like I would set up a shot where he would like there's a bit where they go down into the ant nest at the end, and he's leading them, and I realized that where Adam really shines blocking wise is when he's open to camera. Like when you shoot people, they'll be talking in profile, they'll be talking. If Adam is open to camera, so there's a bit where he's like telling this speech about how his team were killed by the queen ant, and he's coming down stage into this kind of big close-up as I had blocked it, and I realized as it was happening that this is exactly the Batman staging, where he'll like come forward and just like kind of muse to the audience. And that was sort of like, so anytime that sort of started to present itself, it started to become like, oh my God, this is exactly how you remember Adam West, in these kind of moments where he's, musing, out into the audience, really. So he was like, I mean, that was just a huge joy. Again, we almost had an issue. Like I was we were getting ready to shoot, and we had been building all this miniature sets and the giant ants and everything was ready to go. And then one of the executives from MTV, who had just come down from LA to Vancouver and now had an office in our production office in Vancouver, came into my office and said, "Oh, I don't think we can use that. I think Adam's going to be replaced." And I said, "What?" And they said, "No." She goes, "I've been looking at the schedule, and he's scheduled to be in a big scene at the end, and we just learned from his agent that he has to go away for a family thing in that period, and so I guess we just have to cast somebody else." And I said, Wait. So I said, "What exactly is the conflict?" And they said, "Well, these 3 days he's unavailable. He's got to go back to the States." I said, "Okay, but he's available the rest of this week." Fine. So I said, "What's your problem?" She goes, "Well, there's a scene at the top of the anthill where he shows up again, and he says to the kids, 'I'm here to help you, and I'll lead you down there, and I'm here to help, blah blah blah.'" And they go down the thing. So she said, "You're just talking about the anthills thing?" She said, "Yeah." And we had actually found a practical location in Vancouver that sort of had this sort of felt like a peak, and it could be simulated as the top. And that location was only available for those 3 days. So she said, "He's not in. He can't do that scene. It's a critical scene. We got to recast." I said, "Well, stop." I said, "This is movies. It's like there's a way around this. What if we got a double to shoot over the double onto the kids at the location? We'll have them in the same wardrobe." And it's just, but an executive doesn't think that way. There's like, "Oh, he's supposed to be there. That location's only then. He can't be in the movie." And it's like, well, no, think about how movies are made. It's like, if I shoot over a double of him, then all I owe are his close-ups, which are effectively against a sky, which can be anywhere.
Yeah.
So let's shoot shoot the scene with the double, and then on the days when he is here, we'll schedule a time to get all of his other coverage. And that was just like, again, that's sort of Hollywood in a nutshell. You've got these people who are making these decisions that have no real fundamental understanding of like filmmaking.
Yeah,
and you're like, you have to like, so see, these are how movies go together. It's a bunch of individual pieces, and it doesn't have to be the same sky from the location. It's like that kind of thing. So as it turned out, I ended up shooting Adam's close-ups for that inside on a soundstage with a big painted sky backdrop, because it was actually easier. So when you see his close-ups on that top of the mountain scene, that's him in a soundstage with like a painted sky background, which again I kind of like, because even if it does look slightly artificial, I'm like, good, like it should look like that.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
I loved how he that kind of saved the day at the end. He stayed behind and like,
yes.
Right, sacrifices himself to like all that stuff is what I want. Like you want this like this guy to completely like, exactly. And then that's this old school, like he's gonna
like the old hero that shows up and goes down with like the ship, sort of
exactly.
And
that bit with the nitroglycerin was it was actually there's a movie from the 80s that I love called Uncommon Valor, which is not a monster movie. It's like the first like rescuing POWs left behind in Vietnam movie with Gene Hackman. Essentially, it's like a Dirty Dozen put a team together to go get somebody, but a very well done movie. And Randall Tex Cobb is in the movie, and he has a gimmick where he wears a grenade around his neck through the whole movie. And he does that, funny enough, he does one of these like sacrifice deal. And the gimmick is that he says that people ask, why has he got a grenade around his neck? And he goes, well, he figured like if life got too shitty, just pull the pin and see what's next. And then at the end of the movie, like they're trying to get away and he's all shot, Tex Cobb's all shot up, and he like pulls the pin and dives into a bunch of North Vietnamese and blows himself up to. So I always, and that's an old tradition, like you said, like the guy basically, saving his friends by sacrificing himself. So I kind of lifted that idea and made it a vial of nitroglycerin, that he would have, and that's where that shtick sort of came from.
Love it. Our dad actually, back to Randall Tex Cobb, our dad worked with him in the 80s. I think
I think it was the early 90s.
Early 90s or something. His career wasn't doing as well at that point, and he was like a bouncer at some place my dad's friend was working. And
are you kidding?
Yeah, we'd watch
So,
like
yeah,
Raising
yeah.
Arizona, and our sister would always be like, "I met him, I met him, I met him." And and then we're big Ernest fans, so obviously
He's
Ernest
in
goes.
Ernest Goes to Jail.
Yeah. So, Monster Island, obviously stacked cast. How did you go about finding Ernst? We gotta address Ernst because that's our boy. We interviewed him
Ernst
before.
is an awesome dude. Yeah,
Great.
Love Ernst. And I mean, I think I connected besides Adam, Ernst, you know, we were about the same age. So it was like, he was the only other like adult actor, you know, and also like the cool, you know, it's just so cool. So, and he got it. I mean, that was the other thing, you know, we forget that not everybody really has a background or appreciation of the movies, the monster movies that inspired, you know, I still remember, despite everything I said about like, you know, it's a comedy, it's like an old school technique. And still I remember they were like, and this is early days of internet, people like, these effects are cheesy, these are the worst graphics, you know, like it's like, well, you obviously don't ever understand what it's referencing, you know. But Ernst knew immediately, you know, like he said, like in the first sort of table read with the actors, he was like, oh, he knew all the movies, you know, he knew all the movies I was referring to, he knew all the references, and so of course we clicked, you know, like that immediately because he got it, you know, he got it completely. And I also, you know, I also wanted him to be another one of these, like he's a hero, you know, in the movie. So
yes, exactly. Yeah. Oh man, he went down like a champ.
It goes down hard, but it was
right.
glorious.
The bulldozer scene was just
I think almost when he fell off the cliff.
The whole movie's seamless, really, and from the approach.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, and then how you're able to work with actors and things like that, and you know, puppets. I mean,
plus,
I mean, come on. I mean,
it's not
all
easy
that,
to do a throwback like that and have it actually land. You know,
it's so like I said, so many ingredients working together in a movie that.
And as a director, you've got your hand in every pie. You're the director. You're there for like every aspect of the filmmaking. So there's just so much going on.
I was going to say is that I try to tell my students that it's like directing, because you guys are directors, you understand this. It's either the most like hands-on, like get into every aspect, like you talked about. So it's either the most sort of personal job, or it's the most deferential job, depending. And I don't appreciate those directors, but deferential in the sense where you can go, okay, animators do what you want, actors do what you want, DP shoot it however you want, just make it look good, and I'll put my name on it as a film buy. But that's, to me, why are you directing if you're not really going to try to get as much of what's in your head on the screen? And the only way to do that is to interface intimately with every single department and communicate as clearly as you can what you're thinking and seeing. And so it's always helpful when you have people and that's why directors work with the same, I'm sure you guys do too, you work with the same people, you work with who gets it, you know, who gets you, so that you can cut down on the like interpretation, like, no, you know. And I have had those circumstances, you know, where I've had to work with a cinematographer or somebody that the studio made me work with, because there's a lot of control. Like studios are afraid of like, well, if he has all his guys, he's going to run away with the movie. So like studios and production companies try to insert as many of their own people in as they can sometimes. And if you get stuck with somebody who is doesn't get it, it's like you're not speaking the same language. It's like an argument. It's like trying to argue taste or something. It's like saying, well, I don't like this zebra striped couch, and the other person's like, what are you talking about? It's awesome, you know. And so yeah, so you know, I got lucky with Monster Island, because a lot of the only crew I was able to bring from LA was my production designer, Reiko. I was allowed one person. Everybody else was Canadian. So Todd Elizen, who was the DP, I hadn't worked with him before, but he turned out to be really cool. And David Bowes, who headed up the animation team, was Vancouver based, and he was great. So and Ernst, you know, was like a local hire.
Yeah.
And as were the other actors, and I thought all of them were really great. And so I got lucky in that, even though I didn't really have my stock company, I was able to find like talented people. Although Mary Elizabeth Winstead, like you were bringing up, she was like a last minute.
That's got to be one of her first movies.
I think it's safe to say.
I think so. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you discover a lot of actors like me.
It's yeah, I think it's definitely one of her first, because I don't even think she'd done, what was the other one, Sky High or whatever. That was the
that's definitely before Sky High.
And it was before Final Destination
Final
3.
Destination.
I think she was doing soaps or something before that, which I hadn't seen. I didn't really know, but it was one of those things where, again, that character is strong, is this particularly strong character, and that we weren't finding somebody who had that sort of anything. And so I think the network gave into that and said, okay, well, we can look for actors in the States then and bring an American. If we can't find someone now here in Vancouver, let's look around. So yeah, when she came in, I was like, yeah, no, she totally did it. But it was interesting. She was, like you said, she was fairly green. She brought her mother with her to the production. Her mother was like chaperoning her, and her mother was like, I think, very concerned that she wouldn't be like corrupted by Hollywood. So it was like there were so it was like there were a couple of moments where, like, for example, I wanted to meet with all my actors to talk about the character and stuff. And again, we were all at this hotel in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver. So I asked her to come to my hotel, which was like it wasn't just a bedroom. It was like they gave me like a nice room with a meeting room and everything. But I remember I was being very careful. Like I said, your mother can come, I don't have to we don't have to close the door. I'll leave the door open, like that kind of thing. Because I think her mother, and there are, as we've learned, there are a lot of like sleazy people in Hollywood. But I was like, no, I just want to talk to you about the character. I'm married, but anyway, yeah, she was great. She was great. And Daniel, who played Josh, was great. I mean, I had a really good.
I saw he was in the movie Camp.
That was a really big,
that's right,
big indie movie. It got a theatrical release, and like he was like the star of that, and then he's a star of your movie. Then he kind of just retired,
moved back to
that,
Ohio, right?
or something.
That happens sometimes. There are actors who are really good, who who kind of get into it for a while and then, like you said, just kind of move on. Or I mean, let's face it, it's like it is a ugly, unfair business. And I don't know how actors do it, because it's hard enough being a director to be an actor. Like I have a friend of mine, Alan Havey, who is he used to have a television show early on the old Comedy Channel. He had a show called Night After Night with Alan Havey, which was a talk show. He's a comic. He still is a comic. In fact, he's in Wild Things too. You asked me who I cast in that. There's a scene with a vet where Isaiah goes in, and there's the rat scene where so Alan Havey is the vet in that. But he's also in Mad Men, and he's been on Billions. He's in a million shows. And he's still like, he's still going out for auditions. Guy's in his 60s and he's still auditioning. And I'm just like, how do you do this? Like, how do you go in? Because 99% of the time you don't get it. So I think that there's this particular durability in actors, if you're going to stay in it, that just have to be like, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing this, and that's just the way it is. And I think for other actors, it's just kind of like, this sucks, like there's not enough good parts. How am I spending my life doing auditioning and not getting stuff? So I can understand when people decide to
go back home, have a quiet life, because I think, and that's a part of growing up. I think that's a part of understanding professionally where you want to be. I think you kind of what your limitations are, what works for you and what doesn't. And I think a lot of people, like you said, they can realize that they can get what they want in leading more of a normal non-Hollywood life, or and then, like you said, like some people are geared for it. Maybe some people, they have a good run and they do some great things, and they realize, maybe not for them ultimately, but it's interesting how that works. And
so do you have like a favorite memory from Monster Island from your experience with that?
I'm sure there's a bunch.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of them. Some of them were just sort of like quiet moments where I would just like walk through and see, like I said, like all of these model makers making little tiny palm trees and building these sets and creating these animated creatures, and so, like, because that's like, to me, that's like magic. Like That's like dream stuff. That's like I'm dreaming of this, you know, like
that all you're like the mastermind that all came from your mind. You're like the visionary.
Yeah, and from like again, like you know, I'll pull out these books in a minute, you know, like these all these images that I had of like you know, like I had all these behind the scenes books of, and it showed, you know, Ray Harryhausen at work, you know, on these animation tables and these, and I, you know, that's all stuff that you dream about, and then suddenly you turn around and you know, there's this one moment in your life if you're lucky enough. I was super lucky, you know, that there it was, you know, like it was actually sort of connecting, or you know, even on the cucaracha, like you know, I when I was 11 years old, I don't think I told you this, but when I was 11 years old, I spent the summer on the back lot at Universal Studios because a friend of the family, my parents grew up with somebody from the neighborhood in New York, and this friend married Dennis Weaver's son. I don't know if you know who Dennis Weaver is.
Yeah,
Dennis Weaver.
Gunsmoke, right?
Yeah, you mentioned the other day, and I'm like, and then I was like, was he talking about the guy from Gunsmoke?
In Duel?
Was it?
Yeah, well, then Duel, yeah, absolutely, Duel, and Gentle Ben, and he's in touch with people.
Yeah, he's a legend.
Maybe I did tell the story, but again, like the reason I bring it up is because I was a little kid on the back lot of Universal going, this is amazing, you know, like this is, that in and of itself was like a real privilege to be able to hang out and watch Airport 79 get made. That's what I was watching. And then like now cut to like, you know, whatever it is now. And so it's Airport 79 now, it's 1998, and I'm filming on the back lot for La Cucaracha. So those are like dream moments where like something that was just sort of completely out of reach and just a fantasy that maybe someday I'll be making something connect. So like when you have those moments, I'm like super duper appreciative of. But you know, like Monster Island, like moments with Adam, you know, working with Adam and you know, the animators and stuff, that those were real joys. And again, like working with Ernst, I really remember there's a great picture of Ernst and me in front of the bulldozer, the actual bulldozer. And I just remember, and I have this, you know, and I'm not really like a super smiley guy, but I look at that picture and I was like really, because we had just started shooting the scene with the giant, like, you know, prop pincer, like, and Ernst is doing that great, like, get away from me, you know, whatever. And I was just like, to me, that was just like when I was like, you know, like a little kid making Super 8 movies, you know, it was like that. And that's like taps into this sort of essence of us as when you're a filmmaker. You're just like, it's the same thing, you know, like it doesn't matter. It like doesn't matter what the size of the movie. It's like it touches something in you that's just like pure joy. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the one thing I really want to say is that there have been, you know, like, because I've moved from movies, like arguably those movies, Wild Things 2 and Monster Island were arguably like the biggest budgets, you know, that I had worked with, even though comparatively they're not very big. And years later, you know, I would think about like, wow, it would be nice to have like some, like to be back in that sort of like with that kind of infrastructure. It's just like there's more to do, there's more scale, you can do more. And at one point I was making a film at the college that I was teaching at as a summer sort of demonstration with student cast and student crew and stuff. And I realized then that it was exactly the same. Like the core, it didn't matter that there were trailers or movie stars or anything. It didn't matter, because if you're in it and it's something you care about, even if it's this big in terms of like budget, it doesn't matter, because it's the same sort of synapses fire. The same thing goes on, you know. It's exactly the same. So I think people are like, oh gee, you know, if only I could make a big movie. And it's like, I'm just telling you that it's like, even if you never get the budget that you really want or whatever, that there's no difference. There's like fundamentally, like there's no difference. It's just, because it's just you, and ultimately it's just you and the camera and the actors. It doesn't matter. All that other shit is just, you know?
Yeah.
So it's it was an interesting sort of revelation. And those are the moments that on any movie where you're just kind of like, you go back to that first time you made a shot or did something cool, you know, with your camera, and it's the same thing. You know, you want to be in that place because it's like the purest place, you know.
There's nothing like it. And
nothing like it. It's like a high, man. Like that euphoric feeling of creating something, and that feeling of that. It's a one of a kind feeling.
And I think you as a professor and an educator is great because you're putting that into young filmmakers and just people who want to be in the industry's minds, and then putting that into someone's mind who wants to be an artist and create things. I think that's worth its weight in gold for that type of like, that mindset.
I mean, as artists, you live for that feeling, that moment of creative bliss. Yeah.
So, well, I think going back to what you were saying, thank you. I think going back to what you were saying before about those people who sometimes like find another route or another life without that. I think that that's actually healthy if you can, like, for example, find as much joy or greater joy if there's like an alternative path that isn't as like sometimes horrible as show business, then that's great. I think the people like who stay in it, it's not because they're extra strong, it's because they're fundamentally junkies like I am, in the sense that you're just addicted to this high, and you'll sort of suffer through any indignity or time to get that high. It's like that scene in Train Spotting, where Ewan McGregor dives into the worst toilet in Scotland to get the heroin. It's like you're willing to like go through that, like literally swim through shit to get the heroin. It's because you're addicted to that thing, and that's just who you are, And so it's like, it's not like, oh, well, he has more, tenacity, or he's got it, but it's not. It's addiction. It's addiction to the process. And if you're not addicted and you can take it or leave it, then you're going to suffer a lot less. I think.
It's a good thing to be addicted to.
And then the life of an artist, man. When you're a real artist like you, I mean, it all goes back to it's all a piece of art, and I think that's a lot of that artist mindset. I mean, Da Vinci.
Especially you're not like. Some directors, they're more in like the business mindset of like filmmaking, but you're definitely, you like the creative and the artistic side of it.
And you can be given something
it speaks volumes.
Yeah, even going into 606 the Child, it was
like that. Like, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's one of those that is a. I think I was at the lowest, possibly the lowest point, like in terms of depression. Like okay, it's come to this. Kind of thing. I'm curious, you're like, have you guys have seen that movie?
Yeah, we remember when it came out. It was
really
saw it weird. 2 weeks ago, but like we remember seeing it at the video store, and like
it was just people talk about it because they'd be like,
oh, it came out on June 6th.
That's right.
The same day the Liev Schreiber movie came out.
Right, the Omen remake. Right, exactly.
But I mean, if you read the consensus online, like honestly, most people.
There was somebody on IMDb talking about how it's better than the
Liev Schreiber remake,
because that one was another one of those like just moment for moment remakes. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's funny because again, the benefit was there have been certain circumstances with where again, like the coffers are there's not one shekel in the bank, and you're like, okay, like I don't have any other skills, like this is before I was a teacher, so I'm like, all right, what's out there? And the asylum that produced The Child and Mega Shark and so forth, I had known them because they had actually released on video The Big Empty. Like they were a distributor before they were a production company. So they actually started, oddly enough, releasing like really low budget but like arty independent films. They had nothing to do with these like mockbusters. So those guys I knew because they had distributed The Big Empty. I think they had an exclusive deal with Hollywood Video in those days, and that was a big deal to see like your movie on a shelf. Like even if it didn't get out in theaters, it was like, oh cool, it's actually in Hollywood, it's on a chain. A lot of people can rent it.
Yeah.
So I think prior to that, they had asked me to write. I wrote the story. I don't even know if I'm credited for this. I think I wrote the story for Hillside Stranglers, which was like a Hills Have Eyes knockoff. So, and I started to work for them in that capacity, doing little writing gigs. And then they asked me, well, then I asked them, I said, you guys have anything? And they said, yeah, they said, we need an Omen knockoff, and to jibe with the release of the Omen, reboot. and I was a huge, like a lot of people, I was a huge fan of the Richard Donner Omen, because I was like, that came out right at the exact time when I was like, I was a little kid. It was like the most graphic, the most like, to me, that was like one of the scariest, most intense, adult horror films I'd ever seen. And so I was like, all right, cool. This is in my brain. That's easy. I can take, again, the love of the Omen and sort of reconstitute it into something. And it's like no accident that your lead character is like, going back to America's Deadliest Home Camera, he's like an ENG news camera. Like you're just taking everything in your life and just throwing it into a mixer and like whatever. And but again, those movies are like crazy low budget. I mean, you're talking about, and look, and when I say this, it's not like if you say a movie was made for $200,000 or whatever, that's still a lot of money. Like we made some guy who kills people for like $250,000, but it's how you spend that money. Like when you're a corporation or a company spending $200,000, you're not necessarily putting it all into the movie. And so you have like, I think I made that movie in 12 days.
Wow.
And it's just like, like you just bare bones, like, what you're working with, to the point where like, like the lead character is wearing like my clothes. I like my Volvo is his car. It's like one of those things where you're just like using everything that you got to just get the scenes done. Funny enough, that the kid, BooBoo Stewart, ended up going somewhere after that, which is
Twilight movies, the Descendants movies on Disney, and he was the lead in a freaking Kevin Costner movie like a year ago. That's insane.
Yeah, he's in a lot of good shit these days. He's like another person
you discovered.
You helped discover. Yeah,
I mean, his father was actually the effects guy on the movie. His father was a old time, like practical effects dude. And he was I don't know how that worked. I think he might have been the one that was hired first and then said, hey, my kid is an actor. Can he audition or something like that? Yeah. And I remember there was because his father was like this real, like big, like he almost like a biker, like a hardcore, like really rough, big guy. It's funny because a lot of guys on sets, when you start to work on movies, a lot of these guys that are like grips and get, electric and stuff like that, they're like, a lot of these guys are like these real macho, like big fucking like truck driver dudes. I'm this little guy and I'm a little nerd, and I never have any problem dealing with them like in that context. But it's like you would never interact with these guys in real life, but in the movie context, it's fine. And I remember we were doing a scene at the end where it's essentially, the scene at the end of The Omen where, it's a daddy, no, like the father's gonna kill him. And he's screaming like, no, daddy, no, whatever. And we did take after take of BooBoo like crying out, daddy, don't kill me or whatever. And I looked over and this tough effects guy is like in tears. Like, I can't hear my son saying that. That's, he was so upset that his son was saying, daddy, don't hurt me. He was like this, this guy's like breaking down. But yeah, like I got to do, like there's a couple things in that, it's like lawnmower attacking somebody,
Yeah, yeah, and then the recurring violence. It's a very gory movie. The Death by Ceiling fan was like one of our favorites.
Yeah. Right.
Oh my god, that was funny.
The whole shed sequence.
The shed scene. Well, that's definitely like I think that's probably more Evil Dead inspired in some ways. And although actually, maybe I don't know if I mentioned this, but America's Deadliest Home Video was almost not the movie that I ended up making. I had an idea for a possessed lawnmower movie that was going to be like Duel or Jaws. It was going to be like this. Imagine a possessed lawn or Killdozer. It was going to be a lawnmower that was basically like terrorizing a suburban neighborhood, almost like the Burbs. And it ended up being like Hatari or something, where like people are in cars trying to like lasso it, or chasing it. And that idea went, away very quickly. But when it came time to do the shed scene, I was like, well, fuck it. Let's have the lawnmower attack, like let's do the lawnmower attack in there. The gag with the poker going through Lucy's mouth and coming out the back of her head. That's just like again, it's just like, what can we do to sell the to sell the moment? So it's like old school stuff. It's like a profile, forced perspective where, it's like the old arrow under the arm trick, where so that he's like, a foot off the camera and she just has to run and it has to sync up so it looks like it. And then, we had a very small, like a styrofoam mannequin head with a wig for the exit shot, and just put like spam, like for the thing popping out the back, things like that. It was all very homemade,
the power tool scene.
We had our nephew was over the day we were watching that, and he saw some of those.
He's like 11,
and he thought it was pretty cool. We're like, we're doing research right now, and he kind of got involved and was watching some of that.
Yeah,
and really
he liked the power tool death scene.
Yeah.
The two lead actors, Sarah, was it Sarah Leaving?
Yeah.
And then
Scott, she was. Sarah was like I think somebody that the Asylum used quite a bit in those days. I think she's got a lot of Asylum titles.
And then Adam Vincent, he didn't act a lot, but he did. I think he did a pretty good job.
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did a good job.
And it was cool.
I think a lot of the cast I thought was solid.
Scott's movie was hilarious.
That?
Scott's dad, the one who dies by the grandpa dies by the ceiling fan.
Big Jake, right?
It was just a fun movie to watch. Like we really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. Look, if you got anything out of that, it was then what's interesting about that movie, that was the first movie I shot digitally, 2006 or something.
Yeah.
So up to that point, everything had been shot 35 millimeter. Monster Island, Wild Things 2, all my movies up to that point were just 35 because that was the format. And 2006 was the first time where 24 frames per second. I think it was the original Sony camera. It was essentially the same camera model that was used on episode 1, of Star Wars. So it was right around that time.
Yeah.
And it was just, again, it was practical for the company because it was just cheaper, and that was I've never shot film since. Actually, that was Monster Island, I think, was the last time I ever ran film through a camera. Everything since then has all been digital.
I think like it was like 2012, 2013 when everything just really switched over to digital. Now it's all digital.
Weaning themselves off.
But you were kind of at the head of the game there in a way. Yeah. I think independent cinema.
A few even like theatrical movies had been filmed on video. I think episode 2
was the first completely digital movie.
Right.
Scary Movie 4 was one of them.
Yeah.
It was like the real beginning. I think that was the only. It was before there was a Red. It was before there were the Arri Alexa, which is now my preferred. If I have a choice, it's my preferred digital camera because it's the closest, I think, in feel to film. And the Sony camera was definitely, as an early camera, it has a more clinical sort of digital look to it. It's more like video because it's just where the technology was at the time. But
nowadays you can't even tell the difference between film.
No, you can't. No, honestly, you can't. And because my budgets still are small and sometimes very small, there really isn't an option. It's like because it's you can kind of do the math and go, okay, well, we can shoot this on film, but instead of shooting it in 18 days, you have to shoot it in 10 because we have to make up for the amount of money we're spending on laboratory fees and all the transfer fees. So or it'll come down to really, if it just comes down to days, which is the most valuable thing you can have on a movie, it's like, because that just means more time to get it right. And so I'll always trade
more takes.
I'll trade days for film. Because like you said, it's like at the point now where I don't really, it'd be nice, but it's not necessary, for me to shoot on film anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, that was an interesting. Like I said, I remember, I very clearly remember before, as I was making that movie, because we were shooting the scene where BooBoo is supposed to come out of the wreckage of the plane.
Yeah, and he comes out with his G.I. Joe.
Yeah, exactly. Right, his burnt G.I. Joe. And that shot actually where he kind of comes over the rise was one of the few shots where we were allowed to do some effects work to enhance that moment. Essentially, we're out like in Griffith Park in the middle of the night and shooting this kid, and I just remember there wasn't even any water or a place to go to the bathroom, or there was no like production. It was just kind of like it was like the worst kind of like show up, and I remember thinking like, my God, this is like, this is what it's come to. And being very depressed about just, and truthfully, I think this is another thing. I don't think artists, or at least I don't have a lot of perspective. It's like you forget that you've had the opportunity to do, been very lucky to get these other opportunities. And instead of concentrating on that, I was concentrating on like this poor me. I'm making this really shitty, Omen knockoff for 2 cents, in the woods. And it was like the scene in Ed Wood, where he's like, where they're shooting the octopus scene, like throw the octopus around you. Like it's killing you. So the fact that you guys were able to watch it and got anything out of it is fun.
You as a director, I think in situations as an artist, something's either going to bring out the best in you or bring out the worst in you. I think in a situation like that where you're not given much of a budget, you might have some apprehension about it, but I think like it just shows what a masterful director you are, because you brought you still were able to bring out the best in yourself and put that into that movie. And like I said, it's got some cult status for sure. And
that's why we love watching, independent type stuff, because it, shows you what you can do when you're not given a whole lot. And that's what makes somebody a good director, is what they can do when they're not given a whole lot to work with, sometimes.
So
I agree with you, actually. And it's funny you bring that up, because when I think about some of the movies that inspired me as a kid, some of them are actually really ultra low and kind of bad B movies, not necessarily just the Harryhausen movies, which had more of a budget, but some of them that are actually, a lot cheesier, like Bird Eye Gordon stuff, like Beginning of the End and Giant Grasshoppers and stuff. Because when I looked at those things, they were crummy enough for me to go, well, wait a minute, I could do that, or maybe I could do that. You know what I mean? So I think that actually, you're right. I think it actually gives you the confidence to say, well, okay, so it's not completely out of the question. Like I can probably get close to that sort of level of professionalism. So you're right. I do think that there's something to that. Yeah, absolutely.
And you said you watched our movie, our Artful Brother. Like we watched Shoot the Piano Player, the Truffaut movie, in grad school for a class, and we're like, man, like if we can make something that just kind of gives us the feeling and follows the vibe of that'd be awesome. Yeah.
It's I can see that. Yeah, no, I can see that. I think those influences are huge, and you carry them with you, and they come out in very interesting ways. So even with something like The Child, even though it was like, again, like no money, and and actually, and to a certain extent, like when I cut the thing together, and I was trying again to use every trick in the book to make it work. We didn't really have many prosthetic gags, so a lot of stuff was just, like you said, it's like blood spray gags and things like that we could do. And I remember one of the producers looking at an early cut and saying, "Where's the plane crash?" Because the script that they approved, a plane crash, that's what happens. He survives a plane crash. And he was like, "Where's the plane crash?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, it was me, and like there wasn't any water in Griffith Park. Like, what are you talking about? Where's the plane? And it was like almost like he just, again, like had no sense of like if you want a plane crash, I'll give you a plane crash, but you got to give me, give me a model plane, give me something, that I could work with. You can't just say there's a plane crash in the script. How come it's not there? Well, you got to pay for that. You got to pay for something. So I can do. So I remember thinking like I was going insane. I was like, this guy's like screaming and yelling because there's no plane crash. And it's like, so ultimately, like the plane going down is actually a stock shot from another Asylum movie, their King Kong knockoff. They already had a plane shot. So like, well, there's your plane shot, didn't cost you a dime, but no, some of the actors that were fun to work with. And, like I said, I got to do a couple of goofy goofy makeup effects. So that was fun.
Yeah, definitely. And just the ending is so funny how he just becomes his Aunt Mary Lou Conroy, I think it was.
He becomes part of her like national cooking TV show after he just left a trail of bodies behind him.
Her little like side.
But who's gonna think he had anything to do with it? Come on, he's a little innocent kid. Like who's been through so much already. Yeah.
And like I said, like
the ending was definitely
it was a strong script, and I think what you said, you didn't get to see the plane crash the way you wanted to, use a stock or whatever, stock footage, everything. But at the same time, the script was so funny because in the beginning they're talking about like, I don't know, something like 300 to 500 people around the plane, or like hundreds of people died, and it's so dark. But it sets up that the one kid survives because he's he's got freaking
he's protected, right. Lucifer's got him. Lucifer's got him covered. Yeah. It's but there was still cool stuff. Like we had a cool there was like a hospital set that we had that was one of the they had I think I've mentioned this. They have certain standing sets in LA that are like never changed because so many shows use hospitals or police stations. So we had this and typically they're like almost like leftovers from the 70s. So it's like a hospital, from the 70s, and so that was fun to do like stuff in there and make that stuff work. And it's in those circumstances you do the best you can with what you've got. And I still feel like when I'm actually making it, regardless of how difficult it is, or how many limitations there are, I still in the moment, I still am like committing 100% to the process, because again, you're lucky if you get to be making anything. So no matter, even if it's this big. So I still try to do something that will, at least I can look at and go, okay, that wasn't so bad, or that's marginally interesting.
I think it just stands to your competence as a director, really, as dealing with because as a director you're wearing so many hats. You've done a lot of really good things, and we're just having the best time letting you go back through that. And I know that some of this stuff is
like you said, you don't get to look back enough and get to go over everything and how cool it's been and stuff. So that's cool.
Well, it's very interesting to kind of and it does give me some perspective, because you're like, I'm looking like, wow, there's a lot to talk about. It's funny because I was watching a conversation between William Friedkin and Nicholas Winding Refn talking just about Sorcerer, and it's just kind of this exhaustive sort of interview where Refn is asking Friedkin all these questions and stuff, and it's just like I said from the beginning, I enjoy watching this stuff as a filmmaker, watching other filmmakers talk about it. So what you guys are doing is just, it's interesting. I'm grateful, but I also think it's, this is the kind of stuff I like to watch. So it's fun to do. It's totally fun.
So, Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus.
Is that a foreign poster for it behind you?
That's the Japanese poster.
Amazing.
Which I think is great artwork. So that was.
Let's address the elephant in the room. Ace Hannah, what was that all about?
So that kind of goes back to my experience on The Child. Because I think even on The Child, I don't think did I take my real name on that? I don't know. I think it says, maybe I think I had my real name as the director, maybe not as the writer.
I think you had the writer wasn't you, but the director was.
I mean, I was both, but I mean, I started to take pseudonyms.
Cool.
Because Ace Hannah I took because I was convinced now that anything that I made in that world was going to be messed with. Like what happened was that as if it wasn't bad enough. Well, it was hard enough making like The Child under the circumstances, right? When we got into like post-production, which is I'm more hands-on in that than as hands-on in that as any other aspect. It was almost like there was a producer there at the time when they were mixing the movie, and they were just really I don't know quite how to put this. They just didn't want me like even trying to make it a better movie. Like there were scenes where like somebody would close a car door and there was no sound effect. And they would just be like, it's fine, whatever. And I'm like, it's like a close-up of somebody closing a car door. You've got to put a car door. It's like, it wasn't like me like trying to be like it was just like, let's just put the basic so it feels like a professional movie.
Yeah.
And I felt like and they also wielded a lot of influence on the edits of these movies, so that by the time you're done with it, it's kind of like, oh my God, this is such a mess. Like, do I really want to put my name on this? So when I went into Mega Shark, I was sort of anticipating that sort of meddling. And I knew it was going to be, again, another one of these 12-day wonders. So I just decided that I would just take a pseudonym. And the name I picked is actually from a film. It's funny enough. So funny. It's one of these films that remains in my life. Hang on a second.
Oh, cool.
So if somebody, it's odd, everybody has like a favorite movie, but if somebody was to ask me my favorite movie, it would be this movie.
Bitter Cruise, yes.
Wow.
Which is, sort of anticipates and influences everybody from Sergio Leone to Sam Peckinpah. It was directed by Robert Aldrich, who did The Dirty Dozen and Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. And it's just one of these movies that, like, it made a huge had a huge impact on me, because it was this weird blend. Even though it was 1954, it has it's funny, but it's also brutally violent, and it like mixes black comedy with violence, and it was like, wow, you can do that. That appealed to me. So there's a character in the movie that's not even an on-camera character. It's just somebody Burt Lancaster, who's this, refers to this guy, Ace Hannah. Ace Hannah taught me, shot my father in a poker game when I was a kid. Ace Hannah taught me how to be a bad guy. And it's Ace Hannah just always sounded like this crazy, ridiculous, sort of made up name. So I just said, okay, I'll be Ace Hannah. Nice. And as it turned out, true to my expectations, when I finished the movie, they did get in there and start messing with the edit. And I've told this before. It's funny because the producers have gotten upset with me for talking about this, but at this point, it's like, really, it's what they did was, the movie has a certain pacing that is not the pacing that I wanted the movie to have. If you're dealing with a really sort of silly movie, where it's not performance driven, and the effects are not going to be strong, then the only thing that you can do is make it fast. Like, you want it to at least move so that it has energy, so that even if it's stupid or ridiculous, you're like, it's just kind of it's not putting you to sleep. And my wife now says that Mega Shark, she says it feels like a porno, like it has porno editing. It's just kind of like, there are moments where it's just like, you cut away to these reaction shots and people are just kind of like, just hanging there. And it's just, and that's not how it was edited. And what happened is when I delivered my cut of the movie, it was a faster cut, but it was shorter than they wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So they decided to go in and pad the movie. And instead of padding it the way we've talked about, which is like shooting extra scenes or whatever, they just opened up the movie. So it's like the equivalent of like double spacing your book report to make it seem longer. So they just started opening up the cuts so that somebody would go, there's the shark. And typically, somebody goes, there it is, and you cut, Instead, now it'd be like, there's the shark. 1,000, 2,000. And then you would, you know what I mean? So there's this like stagnant, a halting quality to the movie that just drives me insane, because, for everything that's wrong with it, the last thing you needed to do was like stretch it. So I know nobody cares. I mean, it is what it is. It's like, but as a filmmaker, I'm like, this was actually a lot more fun if it had the energy that it was intended to have, which it did have until they stretched it like a piece of taffy. And that's my own little pet peeve amongst many pet peeves.
The Golden Gate Bridge scene where it like breaks down. That was really cool.
Yeah. And then the whole thing about the legend about the trailer when it went on YouTube. I mean, this movie really was influential in that in the whole mock.
Because right after that, the whole mockbuster thing really
trend took off. With Sharknado was right after that, and then it kind of basically ripped off the idea of your movie, really. But the whole idea of the whole mockbuster thing and everybody and like people latching onto that, like on the Sci-Fi Channel, and then and direct to DVD things, streaming.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of other like Mega Shark versus movies after yours too.
Yes, exactly.
Correct. Yeah. Well, what happened was that Mega Shark actually was the first thing that they did that wasn't a mockbuster, in the sense that it wasn't really a copy of anything that was coming out. It was just its own thing, and it was easy to do because, again, it was one of those circumstances where I needed the money. And they said, "Can you write and direct something like in 2 weeks?" And I was like, "Sure." They said, "We have a giant shark versus a giant squid," which is what it was at the time. I said, "Okay." It's very easy for me to go back, knowing my monster love, to go back and basically cannibalize, Ray Harryhausen and Godzilla movies and take all that stuff and just make a sort of mashup, which is what I did. But there were certain things that, and certain ideas, funny enough, certain ideas that did make it, even if they were like, quarter of a second long, like the shot of the shark biting the bridge. That was in there, and that's even though it's there for like a quarter of a second, it's there. The plane sequence, was something that I wrote that we were able to pull off because, for example, the shark jumping out of the ocean eating the plane. We were scouting like an aviation junkyard in Los Angeles, where they have a lot of like rusted carcasses of planes and helicopters, and they're just sitting out in the rain, like they're not even taken care of. And if a low budget movie needs a shot of a pilot in a cockpit or in a helicopter with a stick, you can go to this junky place in South Central LA and for 2 cents rent, not 2 cents, but whatever, $100, go there and shoot. So we had a couple of like helicopter jet plane things, and I was looking around there, and I looked in the back, and there was like a hole, like under like a tin garage, there was a whole fuselage of a jumbo jet, like a whole section of jumbo jet back there, like with the seats and everything. And I was like, well, shit, like this looks like something. I'll write a jumbo jet sequence because we have the actual jet, and we just filled it with crew, and whatever extras we could afford, and staged that bit. So, there are certain things that there were enough of those moments for the trailer. And again, it's a timing thing. It just so happens that the trailer just managed to catch because it was so
and YouTube
ridiculous. But I think the thing that's important to note about that is that, and particularly because of Sharknado that followed, which is the same, Asylum made that too, is prior to this movie, they were convinced that you couldn't make fun in any way, shape, or form. You couldn't poke fun at the subject matter. And my feeling was that when you're dealing with a gigantic, like basically a $300 million idea that you have to do for 25 cents, that you have to acknowledge in some way. You have to acknowledge in some way that we know that as filmmakers that this is silly and low budget. And how do you do that? And so I kind of, it's not that I wanted the performances necessarily to be like wink wink, this is a silly parody, but I wanted the effect sequences to be so big and silly that no one could possibly say, oh, they're trying to be strict. And I can't tell you how many arguments I had with those producers about what we could include and what we couldn't include that was tongue-in-cheek or self-referential. And I managed to sneak in as many of those things as I could sort of under the wire. And then when it became popular because of those ridiculous things, then they were like, oh, we should do that. And that's why Sharknado is so what it is, because they realized that philosophy of like, no, we can't make it silly is suddenly what was making it work after all. So they decided to like lean into that. And that's why all that stuff after that is that way. but I was I was just I just was at the movies the other day. I haven't been to an actual movie in 3.5 years because of, since since COVID, and I saw a trailer for the Meg 2, and it's basically Mega Shark. It's basically
I actually have
the same thing.
Here on our notes, I say the Meg ripped it off.
Yeah.
Because the whole megalodon thing.
There's just shots of the giant shark biting things and coming out of the water. A lot of that was in your movie. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always say that if I had, if I got a penny for every giant shark movie that came out after mine, I'd be okay, but like those jobs are like, I think you get paid more like to install a ceiling fan than you get paid to write and direct a movie for the asylum. You know what I mean? It's not certainly no residuals or anything like that. You just like, here, take the money. You can, pay your gas bill and that's it. That's what happened. But again, like I enjoyed making that because again, I got to do these things that, when you're a little kid making Super 8 movies, and that's the kind of stuff you want to do. You want to do a shark jumping out of the water and biting a plane. That's what you want to do. So
when like the trailer blew up and like they said it had more views than Avatar's trailer and all that in 2009, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was literally I mean, considering like what had happened with like the child and stuff, it was like you figured you do this thing and then it just goes away. Like, and particularly when you make a really low budget movie, it's kind of like it's usually you don't worry. I wasn't worried about it because a low budget movie that isn't really seen disappears. So it's not like it's going to hurt you. But Mega Shark, which is what I expected was going to happen, the fact that it became suddenly like a pop culture thing was like the last thing I expected, and it actually caused me a lot of distress, oddly enough, because the thing that suddenly was getting so much attention was like certainly not my best movie. And if anything, it was like I said, totally sort of manhandled. Mm-hmm. So suddenly this, like as a filmmaker, at least as a professional, you're hoping that at least one of your movies gets some sort of wide recognition, if only to kind of establish yourself and help you get another movie made. And a lot of movies that I had made prior to that, like Monster Island, Wild Thing. I mean, these helped my career, and I had a certain amount. But it wasn't like none of those movies blew up. Like they weren't like people. It wasn't in the air, like that. And so Mega Shark was, and it was a really like not my best work. So I was like, oh my God. So everybody must think that I'm like Ed Wood or something, like that. And that was my fear. So I kept having, like, every time I would talk about it, I would keep, like I'm talking to you now, I would say, well, look, you got to know that like this is not, I didn't want it to be like this, and it wasn't cut like this, and I didn't really, I kind of was making excuses. Even though there's stuff in it that's totally fun that I'm okay with, it was almost like I got known for that movie. And so I was like, well, that's not me though. I mean, that's a part of me, but and I kept saying, look at these other movies. And they're like, no, Mega Shark is what we know and have seen. So it took me until I made Some Guy Who Kills People 2 years later. I was kind of like, had this sort of like, I had this Mega Shark stigma. At least I guess it was self-created. It was like, oh no, everybody thinks I'm just the Mega Shark guy. So, but in and of itself, it was fun. I mean, Debbie Gibson, that was fun because, Debbie Gibson was somebody that, as a kid in high school in the 80s, Debbie Gibson was everywhere. Yeah. So, and she was super cool. She was like totally cool.
Youngest performer to ever have a #1 song. I mean, she's a legend, especially, I mean, so it's cool to know that she was fun to work with, and
she was super cool and really fun to work with and totally down. Like, like she wasn't like, acting like this was beneath her or anything. She was like totally about, and if you see her performance, she's like, she's trying to do it, The really cool thing for me, like much like with Ernst, was meeting Vic Chow, who I cast in that movie. And he was somebody that I, became friends with, that I liked right away, and I cast him, in Fear Force 5 and others. He's somebody that I think is a terrific actor, and I was like lucky to find him and work with him. So that was also a good thing.
Yeah, and Sean Lawler, very famous Irish character actor.
Yeah,
it was one of his last performances. Braveheart.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah. He was cool too. And he's another one of those like workhorse. Like they call it, like it's like the expression like a ham and egger. He just goes in there and like works as an actor. And yeah, that's true. It was shortly after that he passed away, I believe, right? Yeah, I think so.
You said he was just a hard worker.
Definitely. Yeah.
I forget what it was, but it took him really quickly, and it's a shame. But like I said, going out on a movie like that's just you create a legacy for him in a way, because everybody saw that.
He was a big part of that movie. He was really helped sell the movie too. With his accent.
Well, he has that gravity. He has that like gravitas. Like you just and again, like that's the real like with Adam West. Like when you have somebody, an actor tackling what is quasi silly material, but doing it with it earnestly. Like doing it like, because that's the job. I mean, the job is to sell this character, to make this a real character, even if it's in this dopey. That's the thing. And I think, and I always prefer that. Like, I don't, even though I was talking about like making sure the audience knows that it's silly, or that it's low budget, or that we know that it's like a cheap thing. That doesn't extend to the performances. Like I always have the performances play it absolutely straight. Like they're in it as if this is a $300 million real, like this is really happening. And I think that is always, I prefer that. Like I don't want anybody to be actors to be like, I know it's a thing. I want them to be, so Sean was like that too. They just go for it. And that's, to their credit, that's what a real actor does do. They just try to make it as believable, as real as possible. And there are moments in there where he's like steering the sub, and he's like, that are like, like these like heroic moments that are awesome. So
look how they're drinking the beer while they're investigating.
Yeah, they're investigating out of paper bags. That was something I hadn't seen before.
It was just a funny little beat.
Well, I had written, again, I was trying to do I kept thinking like, how can I make this, any interesting? Like, what can I do? And like, I had written that Emma was like, the Debbie Gibson character was like drinking too much because she was, having trouble dealing with the bureaucracy of being a marine biologist, all this. And so like I slipped in stuff like that, or the fact that, again, like to me, people came and said, oh, wow, this is like a big deal. You have like this interracial romance going on between, Vic Chow and Debbie. They're the love interest. And to me, it was just like, what's the big deal? Like that's what's written. I mean, it's not supposed to, but still people are like, oh, that's you don't see that too much. And I guess that's true. I kind of was like, oh yeah, when I think about it, I guess there's not that much, you don't see too much of that, in a genre movie, in a monster movie. So yeah, I'm happy for those things to kind of to get out. And looking back, and now it's okay. Now I can say, okay, yeah, I did that. But like at the time, it was almost like nothing had, in terms of public perception, it's almost like I never had made anything before. So the only thing I had made was Mega Shark. And if that was the only thing I had made, that was going to be your assessment of me in totality. In fact, that's sort of like what I came up against when I was interviewing for Some Guy Who Kills People, was that they had all seen Mega Shark. And I kept saying, well, but you should also see La Cucaracha and The Big Empty and these other things, because that'll give you a better overall picture. But some of the things that I did, one of the things that I did slip in that I enjoyed was that, if you notice, they quote like Julius Caesar in them, like stuff like that, like where that has no place traditionally in a giant shark octopus movie, where they're quoting Shakespeare. To me that was like, like, check it out, we're being goofy here.
We just love how like the like the little submarine there in the beginning of the movie, they use the sonar that makes the ice shatter and releases the creatures.
It's behind a giant like sheet of ice.
But aside, the movie pushes a big environmental message, especially with Debbie Gibson's character. And like I said, people, oh, that's a low key thing the movie has within it that you know, like I said, it's a big environmental message. It really is. Like, don't fuck with the world, right?
Well, like my wife and I are huge animal rights activists, and there is a pattern. Talk about slipping stuff in. Any chance I get, I sort of try to work that agenda into the movies I make. You'll notice in Monster Island there are all these vegan references and things like that, and fishing hurts and all these things that are like that are definitely my politics and my wife and mine politics, and if I can get those in there and nobody says anything, then okay, I'll put them in there.
So about Lorenzo Lamas, he's
yes.
He's huge. He was in Greece, and then he had this just rock solid career as a leading man throughout the 80s, kind of like a good looking pretty boy type. And
renegade. Yeah.
Came from a very famous family. How was
yes. he? Well, he was interesting. He was totally professional, but you could also tell that he knew that he was working on a very low budget thing. And I remember, and actually, I remember asking about, because I'm a cinephile, so I know his father's work, and I know that as a kid, he actually visited the sets of his father's movies, and there was a movie his father did, Fernando Lamas did, called 100 Rifles with Burt Reynolds, which is a big, Mexican Revolution picture. And we were talking about that and all that stuff, and he appreciated that. But there were moments where he was like, I remember one time there's a scene that I had staged where he's supposed to be kind of running around the control room trying to, we're going to stop the shark and do this and do that. And he's supposed to be very animated. Yeah. And he kind of came over to me in the morning and he's like, Jack, can I want to sit down in this seat. And I was like, well, actually, Lorenzo, you're supposed to be taking charge, and I have you kind of going around there. He's like, yeah, but I kind of just want to sit down. My back is kind of bothered. Can I just sit in this seat? It was kind of that kind of thing. And I was like, all right, so I'll reconceive it so that you're seated. But it's the opposite. It's the opposite of an actor like Adam West, who's like, I'll stand in a foot of freezing water and just bust it out. It's kind of like, do I really have to, do that? Like that kind of thing. So it wasn't I didn't get from him the same level of commitment that other actors, or he may just have been having a bad day. I mean, the truth be told, he knew his lines. He did the part. I had written the part again. I kind of got away with murder. It's like he's this racist character, he's constantly making these racist comments. And I wanted, I wanted the government guy to be this despicable.
Yeah.
Nothing's more despicable than being a racist. So he's constantly making references, the sexist references and racist references, and he's fine. He was like, he just busted that out, so that was good. And he's supposed to be oily. I mean, but then again, I had written the character as this sort of classical conservative, government spook type, and Lorenzo Lamas comes in with this ponytail, and so that automatically shifts it into he's a different world. Okay, so he's not that guy. He's not the Mission Impossible bad guy. He's this kind of oily, sleazy drug dealer kind of thing, which is fine, because at that point, if you're making Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus, you almost can't. You already got Debbie Gibson in there, you might as well just go for it, and let it be this, this sort of collage of craziness. So
yeah, we noticed the Kobayashi Island, was that a reference to your production?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. In fact, there's a picture of her I sent you where she's working on the praying mantis in Monster Island. You'll see a picture of her fiddling with it.
I mean, that's just so cool. The Navy ship, was that stock footage?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. It's well, you mean the actual exterior of the Navy ship?
See, the exteriors, it's kind of maybe a helicopter shot, and then it shoots something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, it's yes, that's fine. For example, if you're going to get a stock shot of which that was, any of the real ships were stock shots. But again, pacing wise, it's like though there's like a scene where they're like firing on the mega shark or whatever.
Yeah.
And you get, I shot interiors. We shot at this like abandoned, well, it's not abandoned, it was sort of like a non-working sort of gas plant. And that whole location sort of stood in for the oil rig,
Submarine.
which I actually am. I don't know if you noticed, but that's me in that. There's a scene with the oil rig. There's a conversation. I'm doing that dialogue. Like I'm actually, you see that that's me because the actor who was being paid $2 didn't show up, and I was the only one who knew the line. So it's me in a hard hat walking for this long walk and talk up the stair, and then the octopus grabs the. So it kind of looked like an oil rig platform, but inside were all these sort of like, it's like a, it looks like a nuclear power plant. It's just all knobs and gears and everything, and it was just perfect for like the control room scenes with Lorenzo, and some of the submarine shots and things that we did were like just inside this building. Like for example, there's all the submarine stuff, and for most of the submarine stuff, that location really wasn't suitable. So there was a standing spaceship alien corridor set in LA that we were able to rent, and it was basically just like a tunnel, but like kind of like an octagonal alien sort of style
of course, yeah,
spaceship corridor. And I realized that if we rented a periscope and stuck that sort of in the center of the corridor, and then lined everybody up in like Navy jumpsuits in front of like imaginary monitors, that it would somehow start to feel like a submarine. So it was constantly, it was that kind of like, like what can you do? Like, it was almost like, well, what spells a submarine? Periscope. And it was almost like the same foliage joke with with Monster Island. If I put a periscope in front of a spaceship corridor, maybe everyone will believe it's a submarine. So there was stuff like that was fun to do.
The shark footage, there was like
a lot of CGI too, but there was also some like,
well, I saw like the shark footage with the hammerheads and things like that.
The live shark footage too.
Yeah, some of that was just like stuff that they that we found that was just stock that was floating around that they could use for like the opening credits and stuff. But yeah, I mean, they did things like, they at the time there was this really sort of like trendy thing that you started to see in like CSI Miami stuff with these like white flashes and stuff as transitions, these kind of weird sort of like flares and white flash transitions, and there's that stuff that I didn't want. I didn't have that in there, but they put that. So like there are things like that in there that are that I think are unnecessary. But at the end of the day, it was another movie that surprisingly got some attention. That's what was really, and then it was really weird because it ultimately ended up like they had a screening at the Cinerama Dome or something, which I didn't go to because I was so kind of embarrassed by the movie. I didn't even go. A friend of mine, Alan Havey, went to the screening. He was like, "Yeah, no, people liked it." I'm like, "No, not that." So yeah, it's hard for me to look at that movie objectively, just because I knew that I had, better work had been done for me personally, before. But now I look at it and it's just kind of, obviously I don't mind. I have the poster, so.
I mean,
it's a great piece of memorabilia right there.
Yeah.
How was doing a movie with so much CGI and all that kind of stuff? Because I don't know if you've done a whole lot of it before.
No, I hadn't. It was it was kind of early days CGI. I had not done. Yeah, I hadn't really done any CGI stuff prior to that movie. And like I said, it's like CGI is like anything. It's like there's two things that go into it. It's like any part of movie making. You need the quality of the actual the talent of the animator or the CGI model builder is important, and the time that they have to complete the effect is also a factor. And of course, you're dealing with, these people are not getting a lot of money, and the demands are to create all these shots. So, what you end up with is some shots that are like good, but they also tend to be short, like the shark biting the bridge. And then you get a lot of repurposing where like, well, they can't afford to make another shot of the shark attacking or the octopus. So it's the old like, flop it, crop it, or drop it is the old adage for CGI, which is like, well, we'll take the same shot and we'll do a horizontal flip and it'll look like another shot, or we'll size it in and it'll look like another shot. And so there's a ton of that going on where they're just repurposing, the same shot over and over again. And at a certain point, even the unsavvy viewer goes, wait a minute, didn't we just see that shot? But that's the difference. Like, dyed-in-the-wool filmmakers are constantly, regardless of how small the budget is, are constantly trying to deliver the best work that you can be proud of. And even when you're dealing with a small production company like the Asylum, that's not necessarily the number one agenda. The number one agenda is to make profit. And so it's the classic situation, which is that if spending more money to make it better is going to eat into our profit, then we're not going to do that. And that results in that's what you get. That's what you get. And it's not always like, sometimes like I was watching a piece of like, sometimes it's like, wow, really, you cut corners here and you're like Lucasfilm. Like I was watching a piece of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom the other day, and there's a shot where I remember even seeing it at the time. There's a shot at the beginning where they jump out of the plane in the raft, and that part where they actually go down the mountain is okay. But if you ever notice the shot of the plane hitting the mountain when the plane collides with the mountain, and it's this really bad optical, like it's the opposite of like a X-wing breaking up in Star Wars. It's just kind of like a optical effect pasted over, it's like a bad shot. And you're like, Spielberg and Lucas, you guys like signed off on that. It's like, it's bad and you guys have the money, but it's also like, it's at a certain point, you're like, do we really want to spend another, $50,000? That's all right. So like anytime you compromise the movie for the profit, you're gonna get, that's where it becomes show business, right? It's like, and so it's a difficult thing. It ends up being in the movie, and audiences don't necessarily say, well, that was a business decision. They just say, well, this looks like shit, And a lot of times, like junky stuff that happens particularly in a low budget movie, is because it was a business decision to save money or whatever.
Yeah, catch-22 in a way, because you're trying to push the budget to a certain place, but then you have to sacrifice certain things. And I know you as a director can understand that, because
with this movie, it's cool that you were part of like this whole movement in film that kind of has gone on to like Mega Shark, Sharknado,
and then the Sharknado movies.
You were at like the beginning of all that. Now that's just like, even Drone Wars is kind of like was kind of in that whole thing, the CGI kind of like
and I got a lot, I've in the years that since then I've done a lot more, with like Las Vegas and stuff like that, where you're dealing with a lot of like CGI type stuff. But I also like going back to what I was saying before, because of my, the generation I was born into and my own personal taste, anytime I get a chance to do anything practical, I try to. So like when I did Fear Force 5, that was again like a reaction to me having had to do a bunch of CGI. I was like, I don't want to do CGI. We're going to go back to models and rubber suits and stuff, because that's what I prefer. Following Mega Shark, I for a while there, I was the shark guy. Like I was the shark guy, and I was asked to, can't remember if we talked about this, but I was asked to write and direct the sequel to Deep Blue Sea for Warner Brothers. So I wrote a Deep Blue Sea 2 that was going to get made, and I was going to make it. And then that division of Warner Brothers, which was the direct to DVD, similar to like how I had made Wild Things 2, that the DVD market sort of dried up. That was like just as DVD was sort of dying out, and they realized that they were afraid of losing money, so they canceled the movie. So they ultimately made a Deep Blue Sea 2 that was not my script, but my script was, we'll talk about it, I guess, next time or whatever, but my script was for Deep Blue Sea 2 was this whole, like, it was like aliens. It was like Navy SEALs versus mechanized sharks. It was this whole cool thing. I was really, and I actually, and my idea was to actually do a lot of miniature, like almost like Rancor like rod puppet stuff for instead of CGI sharks. I wanted to kind of go back to that, and then we were talking about doing it that way. We were in prepping to do it that way when the whole thing sort of got shut down.
I'd love to read that script.
I'll send it to you. Yeah, it was like basically like it was like Sergeant Rock versus sharks, and it was cool. I was like that was like one of the easiest things I ever got to write for a studio, because I went in and pitched it. Yeah. And of course, it was easier to pitch it because they were like, "Oh, you did that shark movie, so sharks, right? So that's a good bet."
There was some movie web article I came across recently, like who would be the best director to direct this movie or that movie.
Right.
I forgot what it was, but it was a long list. It was like a list of 10 directors, and you were on there. And they're like, because he's done this, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah. Well, that's how it works, like so much of the, and I've sort of, not by choice, but virtually, if we go now, that we've been going through everything, it's kind of like almost every movie is its own thing. It's not like there's not much of a, there's not a heavy duty pattern. Like if you look at America's Deadliest Home Video or Big Empty or Wild Things 2, it's not like, oh, he's the guy that does. It's a lot of like different kind of stuff, which I personally am very grateful, because I like a lot of different types of movies. But most directors, like they do, like it's like M. Night Shyamalan. You do one thing, and that's who you are. So, and it makes it, and it's easier to sell yourself that way, because you're like, well, that's the guy that does that. So for 2 seconds, I was the shark guy, and I got that gig, even though the movie didn't get made. But it just showed me, it was exactly how Hollywood works. Like, oh, you did that? Well, then we can trust you with our shark movie,
I just like how you are that kind of director that does all different type of genres, and you've done, I think we got about a minute now, but either way, I just think you've done a lot of great things, and you've dipped into so many genres, and you're just such a varied career in terms of your output. And I just think that shows another thing about what a stone cold like director.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Definitely.
I guess should we leave off here today? Maybe.
I guess
next time we'll pick up on some guy who kills people, Blast Vegas.
Yeah, can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for doing this again.
No, dude, I have to thank you again. It's like it's enormously gratifying to know that you guys have seen these movies, let alone have so much insight into them and appreciation for some of the things I've done. So that warms my heart. It's my pleasure.
Sharing love,